Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Captain's Table. I'm your host, Captain B-Nard, and topic of discussion today is going to be the rise, fall, and resurrection of the Crash Bandicoot franchise. Canon? Question
And
mark. Hint hint. And here to discuss that with me, returning to the Captain's Table for the seventh time, Jonny Reps. Welcome back.
yeah, I thought we were talking about just the canonical status of Crash Bandicoots.
Well, that's my title because it sounded good. Anyway, so what we're going to
Your
be
title's
talking
too
about in
long.
in honor of the rebirth of Crash Bandicoot these past couple of years as two very long-standing Crash Bandicoot fans, I might add, is going to be talking about a little bit about the history of Crash and also an interesting question that follows the franchise is what is considered canon because there's a lot of question surrounding that for whatever reason, more so than your average series, I would say. So, um,
Nah, I would say so. This is kind of a thing that like every series does. There's always like any game series that lasts a while. Everybody always kind of questions like what games in the series are actual. I'm not saying I don't think this would be anything like more or less, different with the Crash series. It's just that the longer a game franchise is around and the more games that it makes, especially for a game that has had such a turbulent history as Crash, that's jumped between developers and the narrative's not always consistent, right?
yeah.
Uh, there's always like questions of like what exact games are canon and like how does this fit with that, and like there's kind of like contradictory things that happen in one from one game to the next, and like how does it all fit together? Does it all fit together?
Well, that is what we're going to try and figure out here. So, just as a little background information for Crash Bandicoot, we're going to go through what I consider to be the four primary phases of the Crash Bandicoot franchise, and we're going to start with Phase One, which is what I like to call the golden years of Crash Bandicoot, which was the Naughty Dog
And
era, and that, of course,
yeah,
encompasses the original trilogy, and then CTR Crash Team Racing. So these were the
and
games.
I think
Go ahead.
let me just say I think that calling it phases makes it seem like it's more planned than it actually was, because I honestly don't think any like Crash games were ever planned other than the first three. I don't think anything else in the entire Crash series was actually planned. So I think it's actually kind of, to
I'm
be
giving
honest,
them too much
surprising that the
credit to
series
say
is
it's a
this. It,
phase.
yeah. And I think it's actually surprising that the story of the series is as coherent as it is.
Well, yeah, and we're going to talk about why definitely throughout this. So, but yeah, so the original trilogy obviously is what put Crash on the map. This is where the franchise, came into its own and just picked up steam. Obviously, as long-standing fans of the series, you and I, this is kind of when we got into it. Actually, with I believe we started playing when Crash Team Racing was new back in '99, if I'm not mistaken, on the
Nah,
PS1. Um,
we played later than that. We were kind of late to
somewhere
the
around
party.
there.
I think we started playing CTR in like 2002.
But I will we'll agree to disagree. But it was somewhere around there. But anyway, so but yeah, so those were the games that got us into the franchise was my point, because those games were just so good. The single player platformer was in at that time, and the first three Crash games delivered on that in such a huge way that it's kind of hard to even fathom this, especially for the younger viewers who might be listening who don't know this or didn't experience this at the time. But Crash could almost be seen as like the equal of Mario at one point in time, like back in the late '90s, because it was kind of widely regarded as like PlayStation slash Sony's Mario. You know what I mean? So it was.
My, my my opinion on that is like, I don't think that's really the way it is. Like Mario was always like heavily backed by Nintendo, and it's almost like Sony never really considered Crash like their guy, right? It was almost like it was just another game franchise, but people like, because
Well, the
it was a
fans really got behind
platformer,
it,
like it
though. That
went
was
into
kind of where I was coming from. Was the fans really got behind it and
right.
kind of made it feel that way? Like the game just like exploded overnight almost because it was just so. Like I said, those core four original games were just so good, that the fan backing was just tremendous.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh, yeah, I guess. But yeah, keep going. Sorry, I don't really have anything to say to
that's
that.
all right. So anyway, so yeah, we don't have too much to say about the first games. Just really great games, and then of course the next game was CTR Crash Team Racing. So that
Let me
was
just give you a quick summary, just plot wise, of the games, just to kind of get an idea of where we're going. So, first game,
go for it.
Cortex makes a bunch of mutant animals. Crash is like one of those mutant animals. He gets rejected. Crash escapes, and the whole game is basically you fighting through all these levels of Crash, or sorry, Cortex's bosses, playing as Crash Bandicoot. You're fighting all of the other animals that Cortex has like mutated, and going through a bunch of platforming levels in the end to save Crash's girlfriend Tawna, who then in the second game totally disappears and is never mentioned again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was a pretty awesome turn of events there, and then it's
but so
instead of a
this
hot girlfriend, they give him an annoying little sister as a female protagonist.
well,
So what an
in
upgrade there.
factuality, I found Coco super annoying when I was younger, but like now playing the games back, like Coco really never did anything annoying. I think it was just her voice that I found annoying, to be honest. Like Coco really didn't do anything other than like try and help Crash. So
Fair
like,
enough.
but
Fair
anyway,
enough.
then Crash 2, all of a sudden he has a sister for some reason, who's helping him out, and they're like, oh yeah, it's always been like this. But Cortex discovers these crystals that apparently can control. I don't know. They can give him a lot of power, but he tells Crash that Crash has to gather the crystals for him because if he doesn't, the world's going to end or something like that. And Cortex is the only one who has the power to stop the world from ending. But in actuality, Cortex is trying to use the crystals to, I don't remember what, take over the world or mind control people or something, right?
Something like that.
Yeah, and but
Oh, and then
Embryo, who's
Embryo shows
Cortex's
up
like
for
main
some reason
assistant.
to help Crash
Yeah,
stop
yeah,
Cortex and all that
yeah.
good stuff.
He was Cortex's main assistant in the first game, who did again really didn't appear in a canon game then in any major role until Mind Over Mutant. But that's getting ahead of ourselves.
Very
So
much so.
Embryo then helps Crash to combat Cortex because he knows Cortex's secret plan. And at the end of the game, on the secret ending, what happens is Embryo uses his laser to blow up Cortex's space station because Crash collects gems, and Embryo uses those gems to power his laser instead of collecting crystals for Cortex or something like that. The story's kind of a little convoluted there because if you finish the straight right like the normal ending of the game, Crash brings all the crystals to Cortex, but then like stops him right before he uses his Cortex thing. And then in the
It's the
secret
Cortex
ending, Crash brings
Vortex.
the gems to Embryo. Yeah, Cortex Vortex. Crash in
Yes.
the secret ending, Crash brings all the gems to Embryo, and he blows up Cortex's space station or whatever. So in
Sure.
the third game, the blown up space station just lands and destroys an ancient temple that releases Uka Uka, who's the evil witch doctor mask, who turns out to be the guy behind Cortex's plans all along. And then Uka Uka brings about his boy Entropy, who has the power of time travel and whatever. So his new thing is he wants to Back to the Future, or spoilers, Avengers Endgame, his way back in time to pick up those crystals before Crash got them and use the crystals again. But of course, the good witch Doctor Mask Aku Aku, who helps Crash out, uh, he has Crash go back in time. Against all of Cortex's minions, and of course Crash wins, collects all the crystals, and then at the end of that game, actually on the secret ending, Cortex and Entropy get turned to babies and sent to the Stone Age or something like that.
Yeah, I almost
Yeah,
forgot about that
I
actually.
honestly, when we're talking about the canonical status of these games, we're gonna have to talk about that later at some point. So let's continue.
Yeah, and I feel like as a
The
side
fourth
note,
game is
I have to say I feel
yeah.
like secret endings like that have to kind of be taken with a grain of salt because like half the time you would
It
just think
depends
it's
though
like a
because
joke.
it depends though because the secret ending of Crash 2 is the real ending of the game because without the secret ending of Crash 2,
You wouldn't
Cortex's
set up
space
Crash
station never gets
3.
shot down
Yeah.
and it never opens up the temple. So there's some problems
Yeah.
there. Anyway,
That is true.
uh
You're already starting to
yeah,
see
so we're not even
the tumultuous history of the Crash storyline is already starting
well,
to show, and we're only like 3 games into 15 games, so it's only going
yeah,
to get more bumpy.
this was the best planned of the series, the best planned games of the series. So
Yes,
anyway, the next phase of Crash is or I guess all that
the
we're
next
considering
game.
CTR.
Yeah.
Yeah, the next game is Crash Team Racing, and in this, basically, everybody's kind of back to their normal rules. The status quo is returned with no apparent reason, and an alien shows up who wants to turn the world into a concrete parking lot, and you have to race against him. All the people on Earth race against each other to find the best racer, and then whoever you choose to play as in the adventure mode is that, of course, the best racer, who challenges the alien. His name is Nitrous Oxide.
Not
Haha.
so subtle. Not so
And then
subtle.
it,
But nothing
yeah,
in Crash is very subtle, which
and
is one of the
then yeah,
good things about it, in my opinion.
yeah,
There's always that
and
humor
then
element in the background of the games, and that kind of explodes a little more in the later games that we see. But even in the early games, there's always been kind of that humorous element to Crash, which is kind of like
yeah,
you know, a good thing. But
yeah. So then to finish off the that
That's the end of the golden era
to finish off
slash the
CT,
Naughty Dog era of Crash, is those four
yeah,
games essentially.
yeah, but just to finish off the narrative of CTR, like you beat the alien nitrous oxide, and then he goes away, but then he wants to challenge you again, and then you beat him again, and then he supposedly disappears, goes away forever, and you get a bunch of an epilogue for everybody where it kind of tells you what happened to them at the end, and apparently this is supposedly canon, or I don't know if it is or not, but it might be. But there's actually a lot of things that are said in these epilogues that we're probably going to need to talk about at some point when it comes to talking about the canonical status of the games.
Yeah, well, I think that the
So
main reason that they did that was because, like we mentioned, this was the original developer of Crash, which was Naughty Dog, dropped the franchise after this game, so this was kind of made as like the natural end point of the franchise, was this game. So that's probably why they threw all that in there. The
it's
problem
like
with that,
Supernatural. It's like
right,
Supernatural season 5.
right. The problem with that is at this point in time, and think the year is
It ha-
1999 at this point. Crash is at the height of its popularity, so there's no way that they're going to let it go down like that, that they're going to let it end like that, because they see so much more money that can be made off this game series. So then that brings us to the next phase of Crash, which is what I like to call the turbulent years of Crash. And this is going to be basically 2000 through 2005, and various games that were released during those years, which we will talk about now. So,
so in a lot of ways, to me, this feels like it was the Crash era that lasted like the longest. You know
well,
what I
it did
mean? It
have
was
the
almost
most
like
games in it.
painfully long in a lot of ways. It was almost like painfully long in the fact of the sense of like Crash was like declining each with each release declining in popularity. Yet like you could see when they were kind of on the right track, but the fact that they were jumping back and forth between developers just kind of made it like painful in the fact that like it was like
Yeah, it
you
was.
know
It
you
really
really
was,
wanted the
especially as
next game
someone
to
who
be.
had really gotten into the series because of the very high quality of the first four games that were delivered. And then we get into the next game, the fifth game, which is of course Crash Bash, and this game is just like a huge like wake up slap to like every Crash fan, in my opinion, because okay, I'll say this: the game can be good for certain ways and certain times. It can be fun, to an extent, but there is so much more wrong with
Yeah,
this game than there is right with this game, that it really
well,
doesn't work in the long run. And one of the big problems I have with this game is just the story mode of it in general, which is okay. And I just want to give a brief, synopsis of that. So basically, the premise of Crash Bash is this: Aku Aku, the good mask, and Uka Uka, the bad mask, decide, okay, we're going to have an all out war between the two of us to see who is the strongest and who gets control of Earth, essentially. So they're both supposed to summon their strongest warriors to fight each other to decide this, right? So right off the bat, you have, let's go to Aku Aku. All he can manage to summon, apparently, is Crash and Coco. Okay,
hmm.
what? First of all,
Yeah, I know
before
it's stupid. I
what?
think you're getting a little. I think you're getting a little too in depth on this. I think it's suffice it to say that like they just turned a bunch of bad guys into good guys with
To
no
even the
real
teams out, yeah. So
explanation.
they turn essentially,
Yeah,
because Aku Aku, all he can summon is Crash and Coco, and then Uka Uka summons Cortex, Tiny, Dingo, Koala Kong, Embryo, and Rillaroo. Best
who's like
character
a
ever.
character that just a character that just appeared out of the ether.
Yeah, literally. Okay, so this is so stupid on so many levels, because the thing that really gets me about this is then Aku Aku goes, "Oh, Uka Uka, this isn't fair. You have so many more guys than me." And then Uka Uka is like, "Okay, you pick two of my guys and you can have them." It's like, what the fuck is that? Like, that's just the stupidest thing I've
Yeah,
ever. Like, the opening cutscene of the story of Crash Bash is literally the stupidest thing. Well, so
yeah,
far,
it's dumb, but
it's terrible, and I
I
think the
think
reason that this sticks with me so
I
much
don't
is
think we should
because
get.
it's such a. I don't want to get into too much detail about all the games, but the reason that this particular thing sticks with me so much is because this was, like I said, the slap in the face. Like, you had such high quality games and stories, and everything made a relatively high degree of sense in the previous four Crash games, and then you open this game like this, and it's like, what the fuck did I just watch? Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, it
So
was dumb. But I think that let's move on from that and then talk about the next game in the series. I think I'll give a summary of the plot point. I think we should just go through the games and then I'll give a little summary of the plot point when we get done with the era. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. So the next game that we have to get into after Crash Bash, which, like I said, it had its good points because it was a mini game based game similar to Mario Party, and it had its good points and its bad points, but it
Oh,
was
I think it's probably safe to say spoilers for the entire Crash series by this point, but we probably should have said that already.
sure. Yeah. We all. I mean, if anybody doesn't know at this point what's happened in a game series that has been dead for 10 years, essentially, then I don't know what to tell you at this point. It's not like we're spoiling Endgame or anything that just came out a couple months ago. But, um,
Although I kind of did.
whatever. Anyway, I doubt all 20 of my listeners are really going to be that offended. Anyway, now we're going to get back on track here with the next big release of in the Crash series, rather, and that was Crash: The Wrath of Cortex, which was the next single player game in the series. And I don't know, you want to take the lead on this one?
Wait, what? We want the next game? It's Wrath of Cortex. Or sorry,
Yeah, it's the Wrath of Cortex. I
Cortex.
said
No,
you
it's
want to
Wrath
take
of
the lead
Cortex.
on the synopsis of the Wrath of Cortex.
Oh yeah, I guess we kind of did the story of Crash Bash, good versus evil, blah blah blah. There's two alternate endings though,
Oh
but we'll
yeah,
talk
yeah,
about
yeah.
that
I
when
didn't
it
even
comes to the
mention.
canon.
Okay, I don't want to spend too
Yeah.
much time on Crash Bash, but briefly, I do want to mention. Okay, another thing about Crash Bash. Okay, Embryo shows up out of the blue, who was last seen fighting with Cortex. Now he's back with Cortex because Uka Uka said so.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's two
If
different
any
endings to the game.
if
One of
anybody
which the good guys win and it makes sense. The other one, the bad guys win and take over the world. So there's just nothing about this game makes any sense. But
if anything made sense about it, like it would have made way more sense for Embryo to join the good side because last you saw him, he was on the good side. But anyway, let's just
yeah.
get past this dumpster fire of a game.
Yeah, let's just sweep that to the side because there's plenty more to where that came from. So
Well, next up is Wrath of Cortex, and that
yeah,
was the first PlayStation 2 Crash game released in 2001, I think,
yep,
or two. I don't know, one of
2001
those
it
years.
was.
One, okay, and it was also the first Crash game that was released for other home consoles. So it was a PS2, Xbox, GameCube. Wrath of Cortex was also lukewarm reception. The basic story of this game is uh,
Go
Uka
play
Uka
Crash
brings out
Warped,
these.
and that's this. There you go. That's the synopsis for this game.
So actually, the story. I mean, the game. No, you're talking about the gameplay. If we're talking about
Yeah,
the gameplay is basically identical to Crash Warped except worse.
yeah.
But the story of the game is that Uka Uka brings about these elemental masks to power Cortex's new secret invention, which is like, oh, I had a the laser to take over the world or control people's minds or whatever, but now my new super secret power or my new super secret
Weapon.
weapon is just a bigger bandicoot.
Yeah.
That's how I'm gonna beat this bandicoot is with a bigger bandicoot, and then
Yes.
Uka Uka
Crunch
brings about
Bandicoot. Enter Crunch Bandicoot. Yes.
yeah, so Uka brings about these elemental masks to power Crunch Bandicoot. Basically, you do the whole collect the crystals spiel. There's no like extra intrigue of like Embryo being around. There's no time travel. It's just like a less interesting version of Crash 3. And then Crash gets to the end and he beats Crunch. And then it turns out that Crunch was just like mind controlled or whatever. And he's actually a good guy. So he joins Crash at the end. And Cortex, this is actually going to tie into the next game in the series. Well, not the next game, but probably canonically the next game, Twinsanity. At the end, Cortex and Uka Uka somehow get transported to like the North Pole or the South Pole or somewhere Arctic or Antarctic, and they're on an iceberg shooting at it. Like Cortex is getting shot out by Uka Uka.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. I didn't even remember that because I kind of try to block like Wrath of Cortex out of my mind, to be honest. Because like as a Crash fan, like this was just again these are the turbulent years of Crash, and like the fact that okay, like this game was gameplay wise was just a carbon copy of Crash Warped essentially, which was just like
But worse.
but worse, yeah, which was just so bad because like you never want to do that in anything in anything at all in a video game in in entertainment in any facet. You don't want to do that because your fan base will not accept it, and that's exactly what happened with this game is people were starting at this point to realize like what's going on here, like just a couple of years ago, like this is 2001 we are in with this game, and just a couple short years ago Crash was on top of the world, like it had everything going for it, and then in 2 short years and 2 short games all of a sudden it's like what's going on here, like it's like a nosedive of quality decline.
Right. Let's go on to the next game. So I guess
Yes, let's keep pushing
not.
through.
Are we gonna go in the next one? No, let's just go to the next one. Time wise, not like canonically. So the next
Yep,
game, I guess time wise, released was 2002's
the
or
huge adventure.
2003's Huge Adventure.
Yep.
So basically, the story of Huge. You can do that because I don't even know what the story is.
Basically, the story of the huge adventure is this. Cortex all of a sudden has this giant laser, another giant laser, but this one has the ability to shrink the planet, I guess. So it's another
Yeah, which
classic Cortex trying to take over the
it's a
world, except for different. It now is trying to shrink the world and something like that. So, and you have to play through. You have Crash and Coco and Aku Aku again versus like Cortex and Uka Uka and all of his henchmen and whatever. So this was actually the first. This was actually the first Crash game for the handheld Game Boy Advance, I believe it was. Um, and yeah, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Actually, not a bad game, but not something like again, it's a handheld game, so it's not something that's going to dig the franchise out of the rut that it just put itself in with the failures of the last two games, relatively speaking. Um, it's something like it's a game where you could look at it and say, okay, this is a decent enough game in its own right. Um, but it's not something that's going to save the franchise from the hole that it's now in from the last couple of games. But it's a good enough game, and
It was also a mobile game. I think I played a couple levels of this on an emulator, and like it's for a Game Boy Advance game, it's good, but like you're not going to resurrect a series that was once a console juggernaut with a Game Boy Advance game. So moving on.
That's my point exactly. Yes. So, but it's good. It makes sense. It makes a good degree of sense, which is the story progression makes a lot more sense. Because it follows classic Crash formula versus the last couple of games we talked about are just kind of you know not good. Um, but yeah, I don't
Yeah,
really
I
have too
wouldn't
much
even.
to
I
say.
say that they range from passable to good, I guess. But anyway, yeah. Let's
Yeah.
move on to the next one. Is actually the direct sequel to Huge Adventure, which is Entrance, Crash Bandicoot Entrance, or Crash Bandicoot 2 Entrance, because it's the second Game Boy Advance. Crash
Yep.
game, it again had decent reception, just like Huge Adventure. I think people consider it maybe uh, slightly better than Huge Adventure, or maybe
It
I don't
was
know.
pretty
I
close,
guess it depends
honestly.
on
Like
who.
most of the critics and the reviews have these games ranked pretty similar, and it's
I
although I will say the story mode for Entrance is actually kind of interesting to me and actually pretty good, better than anything we'd seen in the past couple of games, which is instead of Cortex as the main villain, it's actually Entroopy who's the main villain in this game, and it's him and Entrance, the new character, trying to basically hatch this scheme to brainwash Crash and all of his friends into joining them because they seem to realize that there's the only way to succeed at taking over the world is to get Crash and company on their side. So, which is not a bad plan actually. So, this is the story mode of this game is actually pretty interesting and pretty different from what we've seen before in classic Crash formula. So I do actually give this game quite a bit of credit for that. But again, the issue with this game is it's a handheld only. So again, like you said, you're not going to resurrect, something that was a console titan like Crash, pun intended for the future. Um, with a handheld game, no matter how good that handheld game is. But I actually think, and I didn't even really think about this until recently, I actually think that if Entranced or something similar to Entranced was on PS2 or on console, it actually could have been a pretty decent step to revising or revitalizing the series as a whole, because it was a pretty different and a pretty interesting story mode, at least from that perspective. Like the gameplay, is going through and collecting crystals and gems and all that stuff like you're used to in Crash, but like you know what I mean? Like it definitely I think could have had the possibility or the potential to have a really big positive impact on Crash as a whole if it were or if it would have been a console game, I think. So, um
Yeah, I don't know. I don't. I feel like it. Yeah, I feel like it could have the potential of being fleshed out into a full console game, but like at the same time, they just kind of threw together. Like Entrance was a new character. I don't really know how much planning went into him, and like again, it could have been fine on console, but like they had bigger plans in the works. And enter the next game that came up, which was Crash Nitro Kart.
Yes, and the thing that I love about this so much, so here's the paradox, right? So the last game that you're the developers of Crash Bandicoot, right? And the last game that you came out with on console was Wrath of Cortex 2 years prior, and that was basically a carbon copy of Crash Warped gameplay wise, right? And it crashed and burned, pun intended. So that failed, so what do you do next? Let's make another carbon copy of another game and throw it on console on PS2 and again, and that's Crash Nitro Kart, which is pretty much a carbon copy of CTR, Crash Team Racing, gameplay wise. Although I will say, and I know you probably were going to say this anyway, they did introduce a decent amount of new features and new stuff in Nitro Kart versus CTR. They had like the whole anti-grav thing on a lot of the tracks, and they had new power-ups and all that kind of stuff and whatever. But it was just another kart racing game. It had only been 4 years since the last kart racing game, so I this was another pretty sizable misstep from a design standpoint, in my opinion, that you would come out with basically an almost identical, kart racer to something that you had just had a couple years before.
Yeah, I don't know. Nitro Kart was a good game. Like it was actually probably, to be honest, the best Crash games in CTR, but it wasn't as good as CTR. So, and the fact that it was just a kart racer that was very much like I'm not gonna say a rip off, but just like kind of like a sequel where they did not step out of the shadow of his predecessor of
Right.
CTR. It just didn't. It was just kind of
It
again
didn't
another
measure up.
another lukewarm game in a series of lukewarm games.
Yeah, that's kind of a reoccurring theme here. Like the in this second phase of the Crash Bandicoot game releases, we see a lot of games that range from like awful like Wrath of Cortex to like lukewarm like this, what you're talking about. And that another thing about this game that I hadn't even thought about again until recently, going through the information to prep for talking about this, was that the story mode on this game was actually incredibly short. I think you only said it was like how long for the story mode on this game, like under an hour or something, like as far as the cutscenes go and the actual the story progression.
TNK. Oh, so all the cutscenes from both sides was 30 minutes total. But I don't know the story. The story. If we want to go over the story, basically what happened in this game was guy who heard about Oxide, or guy who heard about Oxide going to Earth and racing them. Velo, he's like the Emperor of the Galaxy, supposedly. All of a sudden, out of nowhere,
So Oxide
he takes
2.0.
transports. Yeah, except for he has a lot more power than Oxide. Apparently, he transports them all to his racing arena, and he forces them to race against them. And if he wins, he's like, you can go back to your Earth or whatever. But if you lose, he'll destroy Earth. You know.
Yeah. So again, even the story mode's kind of like a rehash of CTR. Um,
Yeah, except less humorous, but
yeah,
more. It actually did have some humor in the actual cutscenes. Some of them are kind of funny, like
yeah,
when Cortex is like, "Get away from me, you disgusting clown."
yeah, yeah.
Or like when
Yeah. There's a couple things in there, but again, it's a game that's just an inferior version of a previous game, and that's not a trend you want to be following. If you want
anyway,
your franchise to be
yeah.
successful.
So there's
So
a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes at this time that we're not really going to get into, but maybe we will when we talk about canon status of the games, which we kind of want to get over. Let's get through the game. So
yeah,
let's
yeah.
what's
So
next
we'll
is
keep plugging away. So the next game on the list
the
we have is another
twin.
handheld. That's Purple, I believe.
No, I think Twin Sandy. Wait,
No, Purple was first,
did Twin?
according to my
Okay.
info here. Yeah, so Crash Purple. So basically, now we're into 2004. So basically, you have Crash Purple, and this game is just essentially like a fanfic crossover with Crash Bandicoot and Spyro. Another, not so coincidentally, I'm sure, another PS1 juggernaut of a game that had fallen on hard times when they made the switch to PS2. So I think Crash and Spyro were both in a pretty sizable slump at this point in their history. So
Yeah,
they both
I
decided
think Spyro
to.
actually took a bigger hit because Spyro basically went from like, Spyro games I think actually had slightly more critical acclaim than Crash even did back in the day.
Yeah.
And they had this, and then they kind of like Enter the Dragonfly. I played Enter the Dragonfly. That game was terrible. That game was probably worse than any Crash game I've played, with the exception of Boom Bang.
Yeah, which we'll definitely get to in a second. But yeah, so that's true too. Is that Spyro had fallen pretty hard as well. But yeah, so this game was kind of like an attempt to kind of breathe new life into both of the franchises. Didn't really work, honestly. Like when I guess they're. I don't know what they were thinking, to be honest. Like they were thinking, okay, you have game series that's on a downward spiral and game series that's on a downward spiral. So let's put them together, and somehow the two downward spirals together will somehow reverse, and now we'll be on an upswing again. Like I don't really get the logic behind that at all, to be honest with you. But that
I
was a
don't know. Maybe they're trying to like combine their popularity or something. Who knows?
yeah, that
But
didn't
yeah,
work.
the story. I don't even. The story of this game is basically Cortex and Ripto like hatch a plot to like make. There's also a
Crash and
companion game,
Spyro
like you
fight
said,
each other.
Spyro
Like
Orange.
they're
Spyro Orange, right?
yeah,
That
Spyro
they
Orange and Crash
basically
Purple. Yeah, so they
they
basically
concoct a thing to make them Crash and Spyro fight each other, but then Crash and Spyro figure it out, and then they beat Cortex and Ripto, and that's really about as complex as it gets.
yeah. There's not too much to say about this game, honestly. It's just basically a strange crossover. So we're not going to really talk too much about it. But you have that. But the next game I do want to spend a little bit of time on, and that is Crash Twin Sanity, and that
Well,
is
we will get back to this game later when we talk about the canonical status, but I think we just
sure.
want to get the basic overview of the game. Is that it's pretty much a direct sequel to Crash Wrath of Cortex, because as I mentioned at the end, the ending of Crash Wrath of Cortex was Cortex and Uka Uka were fighting on an iceberg, and at the beginning of Twin Sanity, Cortex and Uka Uka are frozen in ice, and Cortex, I guess, unthaws, and then Uka is still frozen in the iceberg or whatever, but Cortex gets unthawed, and he goes and hatches a plot again to stop the Bandicoot, and this time his master plan is dressing in drag.
His plans just keep getting better and better. In case you haven't noticed.
It's
So
like he went from like I'm just gonna mutate a bunch of animals to giant laser in space to go back in time, and then after that it kind of went downhill because then it turned into like I'm gonna shrink the planet, and then I'm gonna have a bigger
I'm gonna
Bandicoot,
have the
and
bigger
now
Bandicoot
and
goes for.
now yeah, and now it's like now I'm just gonna dress in drag. That's my plan.
Yeah, like I said, these are the turbulent years of Crash Bandicoot right here.
But honestly, game had a great setup. Like it might sound stupid, but it was like it almost made sense. It was so stupid it worked because like the setup was he basically he knocked out Coco and then dressed up as Coco to lure Crash into a battle against his giant mechanized Bandicoot called Mecha Bandicoot. Of course, Crash did not lose. He beat Cortex, and then Crash and Cortex end up getting stuck in a cave and having to team up to get out of it. And then all of a sudden, these two bird things come through a zipper in the sky, and they're apparently these interdimensional things that can have immense powers. And they want to, I don't know. They have a vendetta against Cortex, so Crash has to work with Cortex in order to take them down. You find out that they're actually like Cortex's pet birds from when he was a kid that he sent to a different dimension. And there's some other shenanigans happen. Cortex's daughter, niece, shows up, and they go to the 10th dimension. Blah blah blah, yada yada yada.
Yeah.
The
And they
the
end up
evil
beating the
twins, as
birds
they're
at the
called,
end.
get yeah, and they get eaten by evil Crash.
Yes.
So,
Now I have to say, that's a really quick and dirty version of the story of this game. I have to say, this game actually is kind of a point of frustration for me as a fan of this series because I think that if this game would have been completed, would have if they would have
if it
taken the time.
if it would have been the resurgence that it was, or like the Crash's like return to the top that it was supposed to be.
And it could have been. I think that's the frustrating thing about this game to me is I actually think, and I think you'd agree with this as well. This game is kind of a hidden gem in that in this tumultuous time for the Crash franchise. This game is actually a hidden gem in there because this is actually a very fun game to play. It's very comedic too, like to a level that we've never really seen. Like there's always been side jokes and humor in the Crash franchise, but the humor on this game is honestly next level, and there's a lot of funny. I mean, it's really kind of like basic, like second grader humor, but like at the same time, like
I
it's.
don't know. Honestly, some of the humor is like it works surprisingly well. Like I would like
Oh
they
no, I'm
actually
not
got the
saying it
writers
doesn't
from
work. It
they got
definitely
the writers
works.
they got the writers from Ren and Stimpy to do the like a lot of the jokes for this game, and
There
it
you go.
worked.
No,
And
I
like
think
I
they're kind
honestly,
of.
so this game actually, I feel like this game actually like to be honest, more so than any game in the entire Crash series, and probably better than most games I've ever played, actually kind of weaved together like a humorous story that also was like somewhat epic in scale and kind of made sense in the series. Like it's weird, but it
Absolutely.
actually like it actually kind of made sense despite being so weird and like starting out with Cortex dressing in dragon stuff. Like it actually kind of made sense and works.
Exactly, and that's what I'm saying is that I mean, I think that a lot of the humor is like what you would call juvenile, but like it works. Like the story of this
What are you
game
talking about?
works. The
Papu flapping his belly and then the tribesmen all clapping is not juvenile.
yeah, but another thing that I really enjoy about this game too is again the differences. The fact that for the first time ever, you have Crash and Cortex team up in the story, which is really cool in my opinion, because you've had Crash and Cortex at odds with each other for 8 years and
Although I guess in
probably eight
technicality,
games.
they kind of did team up in Crash Team Racing, although they
Eh,
didn't like
I mean
officially. But
that's
they're all kind of racing to beat Oxide.
Yeah, so that's a technicality, but I mean, like, this is like a single player, like, full fledged, story mode,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
platformer.
I think we should like we can spend more time on this game when we get to talking about canonical statuses. But let's
Sure, but
just
I think this game, and another one more point I want to bring up about this game is the fact that this game actually, due to time constraints, this game was actually supposed to be a lot bigger and a lot more developed and a lot more involved than it actually ended up being. Like when you go to the 10th dimension, for example, you're supposed to be able to replay like all the levels, but they're kind of like warped, pun intended, because of you're in a different dimension and you're supposed to meet you mentioned evil Crash. You're supposed to meet like good Cortex from like the
evil
10th.
Coco, but you never did.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what I'm saying is that when it that feeds back to the frustration that I have kind
This
of with
game
this
this
game.
game had so much cut content. Like there was even an entirely different level set inside. This game had like some really creative ideas. Like there was an entire level inside of like Coco's mind that was cut. That there's actually like an actual playable version of the level out there somewhere. Like in I don't know, someone like found it because I guess one of the developers has the game file for it. But like, there's actually so many parts, and there's like you can see there's like bits of like levels that are kind of like still in the game files of the game, I guess, or like level names or like unused audio tracks that are still in the game, and like dialogue that was recorded that they never actually made the levels. Like, there's a lot of stuff in this game. They basically rushed it out the door last they basically go, hey, you have a month to finish this game. I believe I've read that's what happened when Universal told Traveler's Tales. They're like, hey, you gotta get this game out the door like before the holiday season, or this is your end date. And they just had to cut a bunch of content and kind of like half-ass some of the other stuff. But I feel like if the game would have had another year, if the game would have had like 6 months, it could have been great. If it would have had another year, it could have been it could have been something really really great.
It could have been the game. It honestly, and I don't think this is even an overstatement. I think this actually could have been the game they were looking for to reinvigorate the series, to revitalize the series, to kind of bring Crash into the PS2 era, to bring it back to the top of console gaming as it once was. So that's because I see so much wasted potential in this game just because of that time constraint that you were talking about. That's what I really see in this game, and it's frustrating as a fan to see that. But this game definitely could have been the game that saved the series, in my opinion. But unfortunately, it was not. It was still probably, in my opinion, even with all of the cut content and the neutered version of the game that we ended up getting. Um, I would still say probably still the most fun game to play at this point that we had seen since CTR back in the PS1 days.
No,
So
I'd say in my opinion, and I've always held this opinion ever since I played it. Twin Sanity is actually probably no, it's definitely the best Crash game since CTR, and it's probably my favorite Crash game. Well, it's not my favorite Crash, but it's probably my honestly, it might be my second or third favorite Crash game of all time. Behind probably, well, I guess if we're counting remasters, it gets kind of muddy. But if we're just
yeah,
counting like up until they decided to start remastering stuff, I'd say it's probably my second or third favorite Crash game after CTR, and then it might be tied with Crash 2. But I actually like it better than Crash 1 and Crash 3, even though I'm willing to admit like it has a lot of problems and it's probably not as well made of a game as either of those. But the fact of the matter is, it just has like a good story that like it had a ton of like unrealized potential, but even what they gave us was still pretty good.
absolutely. Yep. So yeah, that covers that pretty well. So then we get into the next installment, and that is going to be actually the last installment of like I said, what I like to call the turbulent era of the Crash gaming cycle, and that is Crash Tag Team Racing, release in 2005. So, hey, guess what, kids? You know how we gave you two kart racing games in the past 6 years? Hey, guess what? Here's another racing game for you, because that's such a good idea, right?
Yeah, it's like from what I understand, the reason why this game got made was because Crash actually the original Crash Nitro Kart was getting worked on by Traveler's Tales,
Mhm.
and they who were the guys who made Wrath of Cortex. But then after Wrath of Cortex, uh, their sales numbers were, and the game was not received as well as they hoped, which they actually joked about in Twin Sanity. That's another reason why that game is great, is because it's like
Yeah.
self-aware.
Yes.
After that happened, what happened was they removed Traveler's Tales from the Nitro Kart project and put uh, Vicarious Visions on the Nitro Kart project, which was actually the company that made Huge Adventure and Entrance, because Huge Adventure and Entrance were pretty well received.
Yep.
Got it? So, and I don't know if you knew that, but that's what they did. Is they put
I wasn't
and
100%
that's
aware
why
of that.
Nitro. So basically, they had a game. Tag team or Traveler's Tales was then told to okay start working on you know a new Crash game that's a platformer, and that's when Twin Sanity came out.
Mhm.
But then after Twin Sanity came out, essentially, I guess some of the ideas that Traveler's Tales had for their original version of Nitro Kart were kind of like packaged together and given to Radical, who were the developers of Simpson Hit and Run, and they basically just like molded together those ideas from Traveler's Tales for their unreleased version of CNK with the Simpsons Hit and Run, and then released Tag Team Racing.
Yeah,
So
so
that's kind of
this is
the
where things
shortened
really
version.
get what that I mean, and I as a fan and follower, I barely can make sense of what anything that you just said because it's so convoluted. So it's like this game was working this company was working on this game, this company was working on this game, and then this company took their ideas and then turned it into a racing game, and then we got tag team
Yeah,
racing. So
yeah,
yeah,
but
so
if you, I
tag
don't know if
team
you ever played. Do you ever play Simpsons Hit and Run?
I have, yes.
What?
And I
Did you
have,
ever play
yes.
Simpsons Hit and Run? You said
I did, yeah, and it is
it's
incredibly
almost I it
similar to.
yeah in a lot. So yeah, so it has like the on foot gameplay and the racing thing. Like
Mhm.
and the gameplay and the control of the cars is actually not that far off. But I guess the difference is there's not like any clashing together
Yeah,
because that's the
so
main draw of tag team racing is like fusing two cars.
yeah, so the good. So I guess the
And the
one thing
story,
about tag team racing was that at least it wasn't a kart racer, so it wasn't this exactly the same formula as we had with CTR and
but
CNK, but it's
only
still a
two
racing
years
game.
after the last Crash, only 2 years after the last Crash racing game.
Yeah, so that was a big mistake again, in my opinion. That was the fact that we've already had since 1999. We're now in 2005, so that's 6 years. So in a 6 year time span, we were given three racing games, three Crash racing games, which is just again a very poor design in my
Actually, 7 years,
estimation.
but whatever. Who's counting?
Yeah, it's close enough. You know what I mean. So in a very short window of my overall point is this: in a very short window of time, we are giving three racing games, and that's just not good. That's not a good idea. That's not a
Yeah,
good way
and
to do things.
but the problem is it's like not only were given three Crash racing games, but you were also only really given two like main series Crash games, one like weird party game spin-off, and two mobile like Game Boy or I guess three
GBA
if you count the
games.
Spyro one. So basically, like the main series of Crash was like kind of like the neglected like leg of it, which is because you have these kart racers, and then you have like a bunch of spin-offs and mobile games, and then only two main series games in the span of 7 years.
Yeah, so that's again, like I said, I agree 100%. Poorly designed. And I think that does have a lot to do with the fact that there were a lot of different developers. Like Crash, basically in this
Like
point in time, Crash was being passed
Crash came
around
out
like a
with
hot
three.
potato. Basically, the rights to
Yeah,
Crash Bandicoot were, yeah,
Crash came out with three high quality 3 game trilogy in the span of 3 years, and then the next, I guess, actually 8 years or 7 years after that, released only 2 games in the main line, and they were both lukewarmly received.
at best.
So yeah.
So you can see, yeah, it's quite the downward spiral here. But anyway, back to tag team racing. Couple things I do want to say about tag team racing. Um, so basically, the premise of, again, there's not much of a story mode to this game, but the premise of
I mean,
tag
there actually is,
well, I
but
mean,
it's
the
not
premise
to
is
say
pretty
it's good,
simple.
but there
Of
is.
yeah, so the premise of tag team racing is pretty simple. So you go to a dilapidated auto park or wherever, run by Von Clutch, again, not so subtle pun, and basically Team Crash and Team Cortex are trying to race to find this old robot's black heart gem or whatever, and then yeah, they have to find it or he's gonna
He
die.
well, also he said, what you're missing is he said that whoever wins would get the ownership of his park.
That
Cortex
too.
wants to make it his new base of evil, and Crash just wants to stop Cortex. So I
Yeah,
guess it's like a con. I don't know. It's not like the story is like good, but it's not like, I guess,
it makes a
terrible.
certain
It's
level
just
of
it's
sense. I'll say that it makes a
like
lot
I'd
more
say,
sense than like the Crash Bash story. But
yeah, I guess it's like it's somewhat logical and like, but the problem is there's a lot of problems.
yeah,
First of all, like who the fuck cares? Like it's just a
yeah.
fucking it's just like Cortex had like a thing that could shrink the world and like these lasers and like
And
a
now he cares about
space, and
taking
now
over
like
an amusement
Crash,
park.
yeah, Crash, yeah, Crash is like really concerned about Cortex taking over an amusement park. Like, and then like on top of that, I guess because they're just kind of there. It's like, yeah, let's stop him. Why not? We're all here, right?
Yeah,
But yeah, and then even these characters like Pasadena Opossum and Von Clutch, it's like these new characters, and Willy Wampa Cheeks that you've never seen, and they're now like they're the focal point of this game. It's just like, nobody cares. I mean, the whole story of the game basically can be summed up with that sentence. Nobody cares.
yeah.
Right?
It's
That's
it's
the
it's like
story
a
of this
non
game.
sequitur. Yeah, like it doesn't really matter. It seems so
The
underwhelming
stakes,
compared.
this well, the
Yeah.
stakes are so low compared to every other Crash game. Like it's the fate of the
Yes.
universe. It's like the fate of the galaxy, or the fate of the world, or like people getting like mind controlled, or like something like bit, or like Cortex is gonna like take over Crash's islands or take over. And this is just like, oh yeah, Cortex is gonna like win ownership of this dilapidated auto park.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's important,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
It's like an
Exactly.
episode of The Price is. It's like an episode of The Price is Right or something.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah. So the one thing I will say about this game that it did definitely have a certain level of enjoyability to play. Um, it
It was fun.
the fusing, yeah, the fusing of the cars was actually pretty cool, pretty interesting, and pretty fun. The character select was not great, especially for a multi. That's another thing. Going back to not to waste any more of our time on Crash Bash, but another bone I had to pick with that game was how do you have a multiplayer game with only 8 playable characters in it? Like,
But the
what the
thing is, though,
fuck?
like the characters are kind of low quality, and that's the same thing
Well,
about
that
this
too.
game.
Yeah.
Is that, and it's not necessarily even the fact that the character select is so limited. It's just that they had previous games with such a like Crash Team Racing had like a 15 character roster, and that was a PS1 game where Crash had like significantly less lore to draw from in order to come up with characters. Like Crash only CTR was only the fourth game in the series, and Crash had only been around for 3 to 4 years at that point, and they were able to come up with a 15 character roster. And this game came out like 7 years later with like another, like the series had been around for almost twice or almost three times the length, and they could only put in 8 characters, like
Two of which were new.
barely more than half.
Yeah, two of which were new
And
characters too.
yeah, two of which were brand new, so they're only bringing back 6 characters. Like none of the characters in CTR were new; they were all had been in previous games.
Yeah, yeah. Well, except Oxide, but you can't play as him anyway. Um, but yeah, but none of the
Yeah.
playable characters. Yeah, so that's
So
and
let's not harp on this game for too
yeah.
long.
The one last thing I do want to mention about tag team racing is
Anyway,
that
hold up, hold up. So
go ahead.
the end of the story is that what happens is basically they find his power gem, but it turns out that like his park mascot stole the power gem, and he was really afraid that they would find him out. But then they don't figure it out that it's him, and they blame Crash for some reason. But then all of a sudden, for some reason, he's annoyed by this and says, "I did it." Even though he was just scared about them finding out it was him like 10 seconds ago. So, the game of, like, it doesn't even make sense. And then after they stop him from his plan, which is like getting in a rocket ship was like his big plan or something,
Yeah,
uh, Cortex just like blows him up and kills him.
yeah,
Like I think this is the first time they ever actually showed someone like straight up die and crash.
yeah. Even though he was just a giant wampa fruit, basically, but still.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and then they retrieve the old guy's power gem, so he's not dead. But then who is it? Crash slaps him on the back and knocks it out of him and
kills
kills
it.
him. Yeah, so he
Yeah,
dies.
and
Yeah,
then
that
Crash just like runs away.
yeah, but that was the final point that I wanted to make about tag team racing is that there was a lot of humor in this game. Again, as we saw with Twin Sanity, which was the previous game.
But the
There's
thing about this is, I feel like Twin Sanity had a lot of hits with its humor. Tag team racing has a lot of miss. I feel like the humor in tag team racing, like a lot of it feels a lot more forced. Like in Twin Sanity, the humor is like really like character driven or like observational humor or like breaking the fourth wall type stuff about, but like stuff that makes sense, right? Tag team racing,
Mhm.
it's like they'll just break the fourth wall for no damn reason, or they'll just have like like Nina like yelling "Doom," and that's like it's supposed to be a joke, right?
Yeah, no, I
It's like
definitely agree with you there that the humor in Twin Sanity was definitely better and definitely hit a lot more. The humor in Tag Team Racing was more hit or miss, and it wasn't as organic to the situation, so
it
it
was
wasn't as
way more
good.
like it was
Yeah,
way more in your face and numerous. It was like it's kind of like if you're at a comedy or like I don't know if you're seeing a stand up comedian, they're telling jokes that tell like a good story and there's like a good flow and the punchlines hit you at the right time. That's like Twin Sanity. But Tag Team Racing is it's like it was more like a Family Guy episode in the fact that like there's just like joke after joke that like and stuff that just gets drug on for too long and things that aren't necessarily funny but they're given a lot of emphasis and
Conway
then like
Twitty.
sometimes it's funny. Yeah, yeah, and sometimes they're funny.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would definitely agree with all that. Absolutely.
But
Oh,
but
and how
I
they
will
turned
say one thing that
Crunch into Mr. T for some reason.
I will say I found that extremely hilarious at the time,
Or
and I also found Engine. I found Engine and Crunch were both like the highlight of this game, but I'll say like uh, even they had some things that didn't quite hit.
definitely, yeah. So I think that that's a good place to stop the what I again the turbulent era of the Crash games. Now we're going to get
Well, we spent the most time talking about that, and like I said, it
yeah,
feels like it was because honestly, that was the era of Crash that I think both of us were playing like the most Crash was during that era, because
yep,
like we kind of came to the Crash party a little bit late. Like we didn't start playing the PS2 games or PS1 games until the PS2 was already out. So it was kind of like the
yeah,
era of Crash from like 2000 to maybe like 2005 ish. Was pretty much like when we were doing the bulk of our Crash game playing. So
yeah.
like we were kind of like, yeah, we love the old games, and like the current games were like, yeah, these are okay, but I really wish they were better. But we're gonna kind of pretend to like them more than we do, just for the hopes that the next one's gonna be better, right?
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up pretty well, I think. But yeah, there were 8 games in this saga, Crash games. There were 8 games released in that span of 2000 to 2005. So there were a lot of games. This was when Crash was really cranking games out. You had 3 handhelds, a couple of kart racers, some single players. So yeah, they were really trying to crank games out to try and reinvigorate, hoping that something would
Yeah,
hit and reinvigorate the
and
series.
yeah,
And
and
it
then
just never got
after
there.
tag team racing, and then
After
after
tag team
tag team
racing, we get
racing,
to
oh
phase.
no, this is what happened. This is what happened. After tag team racing, they did not make another Crash game until they decided to remaster the original trilogy. The end.
Yeah, if only it were that simple. But unfortunately, phase 3 is not the case. As phase 3 of in the saga of the Crash video games, unfortunately, is the death of Crash Bandicoot, as I like to call it. Well, that's because that's what it is. But yeah, we kicked things
Well,
off with I know
let me take the reins.
your
The
personal
first one because
favorite
I
game in the
played this
Crash
game.
Bandicoot series. We kicked things off
Yeah,
with the 2006 release of Crash Boom Bang, and the name
we
says it all.
we'll we'll kick it off with a boom bag.
Take it away.
so so you didn't play this game really.
I
I
did
tried to
not play
force you to
this
play.
game, and from what I read and
No,
hear, I did not miss a thing.
I don't know if you remember this, but I actually tried to force you to play this game several times, and I don't know if you remember this, but pretty much every single time you were actually got like mad at me for trying to force you to play it because it was that bad.
Yes, I do. I do remember that actually. Yes, I do remember you because you wanted so hard to believe that this game was good, and
No,
it
I
just
didn't want to
wasn't.
believe it was good. I just wanted to believe that it was like passable or at least not terrible. I wanted to believe it was at least like maybe in the same realm as like Crash Bash in terms of goodness, but like it's not even close. This is hands down, having been someone who's played not every Crash game, but I've at least played like a little bit of most Crash games. Like the only Crash games I just have not played at all were Mind Over Mutant, and I know this game is not better than Mind Over Mutant. Even not to say that game was probably not that great, but uh, so yeah, Mind Over Mutant, Crash Purple, and Entrance. I never played any of those, but I will say that this game and it was even without playing those games, I can say that this is the worst Crash game ever made. Because like it would be really hard for me to believe that any of those games are worse than this abomination dumpster fire of a game. Like, first of all, we know how we said Crash Bash was kind of like similar or inspired by Mario Party a bit. This
Hmm.
game is a straight up fucking copy of Mario Party, but it is much, much worse. It's like Mario Party if they slapped a Crash Bandicoot paint job on it, removed everything that made it good, and then took a shit on it. That would be this game. Like, this is a collection of mini games played in board game fashion, and every single one of them is bad. You know how we said that the quality was hit or miss with Crash Bash? The quality of this game is 100% miss. Like the story of the game, let's start at that. It's just it does not make any sense. There's a new character who offers $100 million as a prize for his tournament. Like he offers a prize for his tournament of $100 million. Now this game was made by a Japanese developer called Dimps, and I honestly feel like in their original draft of the game's script, it was 100 million yen. But such little effort was put into this game that they just made it $100 million because that doesn't make sense. No one's gonna pay $100 million for anything,
No,
right? Like that's like
yeah,
that's that's
that's
like the
pretty bad.
GDP of a country to a freaking animal for winning a contest. That makes no sense. Like the story of the game makes no sense, and it's played on a board game. And for some reason, like the playable characters. Again, this is another game with I think let me just list the playable characters from memory. I'm not sure if this is all of them, but the playable characters of this game are Crash, Cortex, Coco, Crunch, Pinstripe, Tawna, Purra, and I don't remember. I think there's and there's
Tiny,
one more, but I
maybe.
can't remember who it is. Who?
Tiny.
I don't think it's Tiny, but basically, okay, those. First of all, Tawna has disappeared and not been seen since the first game. Like, why the hell is Pinstripe all of a sudden back? Like, I
Yeah,
feel like this game was just like this developer just took the Crash characters that it liked and just threw them in the game for like no reason other than that. Like, it doesn't make sense in the in the story of Crash. The mini games all suck. The graphics are terrible. The gameplay, like, okay, I'm not gonna say the mini games all suck, although they do, but like they vary from like playable to like I can't even figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. Like that's pretty much the range of
yeah.
how
I
good the
seem to
minigame.
I seem to recall like like watching you play that game because this I think another a side note. This was another handheld. This was for the DS actually, I believe. This
Yeah.
game, and yeah, I think I remember you just trying to play the game and just like sitting there going like, "What the fuck am I supposed to do? Like this doesn't make
Right,
any
right.
sense."
So the characters are hold up. The characters that you could play as were Crash, Coco, Crunch, Purra, Cortex, Tawna, Pinstripe. Oh, and Fake Crash. That was the last one. So
So no
this is
Tiny.
like the worst. This is also hands down the worst roster in a multiplayer Crash game ever, and that includes Tag Team Racing that had Von Clutch.
And
Like,
that includes Crash Bash with this stupid monkey that we've never
yes,
seen
with
before nor
yeah,
since.
like why would Tawna, Fake Crash, Pinstripe, Purra, like why are those guys playable? But like Engine isn't there, and like
Tiny,
Tiny isn't there,
Dingo,
Dingo Dial isn't there.
and
Like why?
Troopy,
And True, like yeah, it does not make like these.
Polar. Like, why would you have Purra but not Polar? Like, what?
Yeah, it's
That doesn't.
no,
Yeah,
I think it. No, I actually think so. Actually, their team balancing in this game actually surprisingly made more sense than Crash Bash because they're like three guys on each team. Like there are four guys on each team, four good, four evil. Crash, Coco, Crunch, and Purra on the good side.
hmm
Wait, no, it doesn't even make sense. I just realized it makes no sense because why the what the fuck? Okay, it doesn't even make sense in this because like Crash, Coco, Crunch are all obviously good, right?
sure.
Purra would obviously be on the good side as well, and then like the other characters are Cortex, Pinstripe. Okay, they're bad, and then Fake Crash. Like sometimes he's good, sometimes he's bad, and Tawna.
Yeah,
Like Tawna's not going to be with Cortex.
yeah. That doesn't.
Like what is
I don't know.
like this okay, so this game has like the opposite problem that Crash Bash has where it's like their roster is like weighted on the side of the good characters. Like it doesn't even make sense. This game is just
Yeah, no,
stupid.
yeah. Crash Bash is roster was like, oh, there's too many bad guys, so we have to make some of them good for no reason. And then this game is like, oh, we have too many good characters, even though
But that doesn't even make sense
historically
because Crash
speaking,
has so many more evil characters than good characters. Like
well,
it's
yeah,
the only good characters
absolutely.
for the most part are like Crash, Coco, and Crunch in most games, and then like Fake Crash sometimes, and I guess for
Polar
some
and
reason
Pura.
Tawna's back.
Yeah,
Yeah,
or
Polar and Purr, and then for some reason Taunt is back, so that's like okay.
it's just
But then you have like
nonsense. It's just
you have like
nonsense.
literally dozens of characters that were Crash's antagonists. But this game just stupid. I don't even
Yeah.
want to talk about it anymore.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so that pretty much well sums up that. That's just a just horrible. And I think the main reason that this game didn't
Okay, okay, hold up. I just want to bring up, hold up.
sure.
Yes. So the game's story, I'm reading this directly off of Wikipedia because I remember this and I wanted to get it right. The
Okay.
game's story centers on a multimillionaire who uses the characters of the series to unearth a powerful object known as the Super Big Power Crystal. Like,
I mean, that's pretty lame even for Crash. I mean, come on. Like, really?
yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just move on.
All right, yeah. So that's I think for two reasons this game doesn't get more heat because it's like I said, from everything I've heard and everything I've read
Because
about this game, it was
half Crash fans don't even know it exists. That's probably
exactly
why.
that's what I
It
was
came
gonna
out on
say is because
Nintendo,
this was a
and then
DS only game. Half the fans don't even know it exists, and because of what we're going to talk about now, there are bigger, more central problems on the horizon for the main console games, which we're going to get into right now, which is the
yeah,
next game.
everybody was way too worried about raging about Crash's redesigns in the next game.
Yes, which is now we get into the Crash of the Titans, which was a 2007 release, and this game basically was a soft reboot of the entire franchise because at this point you've had so many misses on so many games for such a long period of time that I guess somebody decided, and so many different developers have tried and failed with this game series that I guess somebody decided finally, okay, if Crash has any hope of survival, it's going to need a complete 180, like a complete overhaul of everything. And that's what they did in this game. So, um, in this game they basically threw out like just about all of the character models in this game and like redesigned. They made major design changes to just about every character in the entire game except maybe I want to say Cortex
No,
and
they changed Cortex. They made him taller. They stretched out his head. They gave him like blue hair. They changed Cortex. I'd say
okay.
the only
I
character that they
kind of
really
forgot
didn't.
about that. I'm not. I try not to think about these games too much, as you said
No,
earlier.
honestly, the character that they didn't change really was N Jin because they had already changed him significantly in Tag Team Racing, and they just kind of
Okay,
kept
yeah,
that.
that's right. I remember now. Yeah. So, but like going back to what I was saying, so just about all the characters in the game had undergone drastic design changes and for the worse. So starting with Crash, okay, so they get rid of his signature fingerless gloves that he has on all the time and they give him tattoos over his fur somehow.
You know what everybody loves? You know what everybody loves is like douchebag tribal tattoos. So let's give Crash some of those.
Yeah, yeah. And that's like actually a central feature of the gameplay in this game because that's another thing is they completely 180 overhauled the entire gameplay of Crash Bandicoot in this game to make it like a God of War ripoff, essentially. Um,
But like much more simplistic.
yeah,
No, like much less violent, and just not as good.
yeah, exactly. So they do that, and his tattoos, his douchebag tribal tattoos over his fur again, which I can't stress how stupid that is enough. Um, are actually used to control like these beasts or titans, as they are called, that you can actually get on these
No,
animals
no.
and
You
ride
hold
them.
up, hold up, hold up. You don't control them. You jack them.
Oh God.
that's
Yeah.
that's what the game says. You jack them.
Yep.
And the game was actually originally called Crash Jackin'. And so I think we all realize why it was not called that.
I actually didn't even know that, to be honest.
Yeah, it was called Crash Jackin' '07, I believe was the name, the working title.
God. Yeah, so yeah, another big thing I want to mention about this game, as far as the not to harp on the character design changes for too long, but Tiny. Remember how we said in Tag Team Racing, oh, we got a couple laughs out of taking Crunch and making him into Mr. T. So hey, they decided it might be a good idea in this game to take Tiny, one of the most long-standing iconic villainous characters in the Crash series. Let's take him and turn him into Mike Tyson for some reason. So
Yeah, they're like what aging '80s African American guy with a big personality can we copy? Like,
yeah, yeah. I guess Mr. T and Mike Tyson apparently were the answers. So yeah. But
yeah.
here's the worst thing about this is that I feel like turning Crunch into Mr. T on some level, just for, if nothing from a humor perspective, actually worked in some ways, just because it was so
Well, I think part of that is Crunch was like kind of a newer character. Like when
not
he
as developed,
2005,
yeah, by a long
yeah,
shot.
and
Tiny, you're
he
talking about a character who's been around since Crash 2 in 1997. So that's 10 years of this character,
and
and his design really hasn't changed at all in that 10 years. His
yeah,
personality hasn't changed at all in that 10 years. And then you just take him and completely ruin him and make him another character entirely. It's like, what the fuck?
yeah. So Crunch was also kind of like he didn't really have much character to be honest. It's like he was a
Yeah.
bad guy and then he became a good guy and he was kind of like
Yeah.
a blank slate. Like
Yeah.
Crunch was kind of more like he was kind of just like a blank slate like I'm a big strong guy type character. So I guess making Crunch Mr. T actually gave him more character whereas turning Tiny into Mike Tyson just made him a one-dimensional parody.
Yeah, exactly. When he wasn't never that, he was his own character before that. So yeah, that was
I
that
mean,
was
he
the
was in
nightmare.
all honesty, he was a fairly one-dimensional character, but he still was like,
His own
not
character.
yeah, he was still not like whatever fucking they did to him here.
Yeah, he's a stupid. He's a dumbass muscle bound tiger in a rag, and sneakers and
who doesn't train legs.
yeah, who skips leg day every day. Yeah, and yeah, that's who he was, and he wasn't that anymore. So yeah, and what you mentioned with Cortex, I'd actually forgotten about that, but they tried to make Cortex look like more human, like more normal in this game, as far as because like obviously Cortex is again not so subtle. Design was
Giant
obviously
head.
giant head before and like small body, and they tried to make him like look more like a normal person in this game, which was a huge mistake as well. And so yeah,
Except he kind of ended up looking like Dewey from Malcolm in the Middle.
yeah, he did. But yeah, and to be 100% honest with you, I want to talk about the story of this game, but I barely even remember anything about the story of this game.
Oh, I can
Uh,
talk about it. The
yeah,
story of this game
go
is that
for it.
Cortex like he starts taking over the mute. No, first of all, he freezes Crunch in a block of ice. He has like the Doominator,
I
which is
remember
like his
that. Yeah,
big
so
contraption that's
crunch
gonna.
is not a factor in this game at all. Yeah.
Mhm. Which is weird because actually, if you're gonna make a Crash game, turn a Crash game into a beat 'em up, the character that would fit is Crunch. But whatever.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, the story and the Crash. Oh, he kidnaps Aku Aku in the first level. But
Mhm.
then after the first level, I don't know if you remember this. What happens is the Cortex is no longer the bad guy, the main bad guy. Nina actually like
Nina
mutinies on him, and now
usurps his
Nina is in
throne.
charge.
Yes, I do remember that. Yes.
Yeah, and then basically Nina has the Doominator, which is like a giant robot. And then I guess what happened? I think at the end, what happens is like it runs out of power or something when it's about to destroy Wampa Islands, and then it like stops like right next to Crunch's ice block and like breaks him out of it somehow. Like that's what happened at the end of the game.
Yeah,
I
that
don't know. It
sounds
was
about
dumb. The
right.
whole game was
Yeah.
yeah, honestly, the story of the game was the one thing I like about the game is like they actually kind of like there's a lot more that happened in the story than what I said. Then there were actually cutscenes, but like they actually put effort into like having cutscenes and like having like stuff that kind of related to the story. But the story really didn't go much of anywhere other than Nina, the original. Like at the end of the first world, Nina like takes over from Cortex, but after that, the story doesn't really go much of anywhere. And then until
Fair.
you're kind of just like making your way to the last level and then
Yeah.
at the end you stop Nina, and that's
Yeah.
pretty much the whole story of the game. But
Yeah. That was one thing about this
I
game.
kind of like the fact though that they at least like even though they totally ruined Tiny, they at least like threw in cutscenes like with Tiny where they kind of gave him like character and like fleshed him out a little bit, or they had cutscenes with Engine where he was like doing his like each boss kind of had like I believe there was four worlds. I think there was like Cortex, Tiny, Engine, and Nina, I believe, were the four
Right.
bosses. Maybe Uka Uka had a world too. I don't remember because I haven't played the game honestly in like 10 years. But
Yeah.
the story was like honestly, I give the story like a B minus for effort and like a C minus in execution.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the one thing that I did. I did felt about this game was that again they were taking a few risks. I mean, this whole game was a big risk. To let's face it, to do a complete
but like
overhaul of an
I
entire game series like this. Obviously, it didn't
but
work out.
but
But
that I feel like the longer we go in hindsight, like the more it's like this game was just like it was just a step in the wrong direction. It was just a misstep for the series, and it wasn't really like in terms of taking the risk. It's like they made a lot of risks, and they didn't make the right type of sacrifices. Like they made like entirely changing the character designs and entirely flipping the gameplay, and like even if they were going to do the change the character designs and everything, but basically like entirely changing the entire gameplay of the franchise and entirely changing all these characters instead of introducing new characters. It was just a wrong move, man. It was too much. It was too much at the same time, and it was not executed well enough for it to be justified.
100% agreed. Yeah, and I think this was just like I said, the product of kind of just desperation on their end of trying, anything they could to try and, revive the series, and they took, like you said,
All right.
a huge step in the wrong direction, and that continues into the final game we have to talk about here in the Death of Crash phase, which is 2008's Mind Over Mutant, which was a direct series sequel to Crash of the Titans, and basically more or less the same thing as Crash of the Titans in terms of gameplay.
Yeah.
They
So the
kept
one problem
everything.
with this game, never played this game, but I've seen a lot of gameplay videos of it, and it has a lot of backtracking, and they kind of honestly, from what I understand, it's not. It's actually kind of slightly worse than Titans. They further altered Crash's character design, where like they made his shorts like short shorts, and they kind of made him look even stupider somehow. And I'm just not a fan of their character design changes. And on top of that, the story for the game, I don't even know what it was. Do you?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you. I've this was you mentioned the Crash games that you've never
Honestly, like
played.
this game at this point, like basically what happened was I played Titans and I was so underwhelmed by like how mediocre all of the changes they made. Like all the changes ranged from like, they could have done that either way to like that was definitely worse than it was. So
Yeah, yeah. I think we were both in the same boat after Crash of the Titans, honestly, because that was the boat I was in. Was I was so disappointed and fed up with everything that had happened in the game series over the past several years, but specifically this game. Like, if you notice, like, we've had negative things to say about Crash Bash, the Wrath of Cortex, Nitro Kart, Twin Sanity, Tag Team Racing, but at the end of the day, those things were not enough to make us stop playing the games. Those were not enough to off put us from the franchise. What they did
oh,
in
I see. You
Crash
know
of the
what? I'm reading.
Titans was finally the last straw, at least for me anyway, to say that, like, wow, I'm actually off put from this franchise that I used to
You
love, that
know,
used to be my favorite game growing up as a kid, and they've run it so far into the ground with all the negative changes and going in different directions, and just mistake after mistake after mistake, to the
honestly,
point that I'm done, and that was
so
where I
to
was at.
so to me it was kind of like I never like it's not like after they released Titans and after I played it I was like I'm never going to play a Crash game again or like this sucks, the series is gone. That's not what I thought. It's basically like after Crash of the Titans I was like, and then I heard Mind Over Mutant was going to be very similar game and style. I was basically like, I'm not really excited for this game, and I told myself I would eventually pick it up and play it out of the bargain bin, but I just was not excited about the game, and I just wasn't into it. So it was basically, and I moved on. There were other games I wanted to play. Like I wanted to play the new Ratchet and Clank for PS3, and I wanted to play
I was gonna say,
Resistance, and
you
I
have
got
to
into
remember, now we're
Uncharted,
in the
and there,
PS3 era of
yeah,
gaming
yeah,
right
yeah, and
now.
Crash, and the thing is, the graphics of these games were kind of like hokey for PS2 games, and we're already in the era of the PS3 graphics just look so much better, and the gameplay was not that great. So I wasn't too interested in Mind Over Mutant, and I told myself I was going to get it someday and play it, but I just never have because like I said, there's just so many other games that I'd rather play. But now that we're doing this, maybe I'll go back and play Mind Over Mutant at some point.
Well, yeah, I mean, I kind of, and don't get me wrong, like, I never made the conscious decision of, like, oh, I'm never gonna buy another Crash game again. Like, that wasn't my thought process either. But I think that I hit a point, like, mentally, maybe subconsciously, where I just, like, it's not worth it anymore. Like, I'd rather spend that $60 on a game that looks good, that it looks like I'm going
Well,
to
I don't.
actually enjoy it, versus
I,
buying a game that I know more than likely is gonna suck.
well, the other thing is this game was actually $40 because it was a budget title, just like every Crash game. Like
Aha.
post, yeah, Crash games were actually $40 games the entire time. Like the first Crash game that was $60. Actually, I don't think Crash has had a $60 game yet.
Well, I'm just
Because
throwing
even
numbers, but you know my point. Do you get my
Yeah.
point?
Anyway, it wasn't even worth $40. Like I bought Crash of the Titans for $40 brand new the day it came out. I was actually excited for it just because I wanted to see what it was, and yeah, it wasn't like I was so excited and this is the worst game ever. It was more like I was so excited and it was just like, yeah, it was just okay, and then nah.
Yeah, but it wasn't. But that's the thing that my thing with Crash of the Titans and then Mind Over Mutant, because it was the same thing, is that like
I was just tired
it's
of
not.
getting excited about Crash games and then being let down.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing, and like it's not even Crash at that point anymore. Like you change all the character designs, you change all the gameplay, you change. You can't change everything about a game and call it the same game. Like it doesn't work that way. At least not in my world,
Yeah,
anyway.
and
So
I used to be on the Crash Mania forums back in at this time, and I was big, like I was talking about the game and talking about all the Crash stuff. Shout out to my boy Jump Button on the forums. Yeah, he was a mod. So, but
okay.
he, he actually wasn't my boy. I'm pretty sure he hated me. But the,
Surprise, surprise.
but what I'm saying is like I was like big. I was actually like kind of in the Crash fan community at this point, like interacting with other Crash fans,
Hmm.
and like the opinion of basically what these two games did is they entirely split the fan base. Like there were people who were like totally on board, like they were like, yeah, this is like I'm ready for Crash to like do this because Crash hasn't been good since the PlayStation 1. I want like this change is like nothing but good. Crash is going in the right direction. Let's keep on this path and just make it better. And then there were other people who were like, this is the worst thing ever. Crash was like, Twin Sanity was good, or like even if they didn't like Twin Sanity, they're like, Crash, this is the wrong direction for Crash. This is terrible. And then there were people like me who were kind of like in the middle that were like, I mean, it's not great, it's not terrible, but like I just don't see why they needed to do this. And like some of the changes I hate, some of them I'm kind of indifferent about, but this is not really getting me excited about the future of the franchise. And it kind of just like split the fan base like really bad. And that's like none of the other Crash games really did that. Like it basically was like people were like, it should have been better, but I mean, it's not like it didn't just split people's opinion, split actual fans. Like it split critics' opinions, the other games, but none of the other stages of the series ever like split fans as much as these two games did.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there, 100%. I definitely wasn't involved in the community, much like you were, but yeah, and like I said, I didn't play Mind Over Mutant.
I was actually
Um,
mostly a lurker. I really didn't post a ton, but I was a
well, but
lurker.
you were in there and kind of like getting the
Yeah.
info. Um, I didn't play Mind Over Mutant. I didn't play Boom Bang. I didn't play Purple, or I didn't play any of the handhelds
Oh,
actually. Um,
interesting thing. The guy was talking about the jump button. I think it was him, but he actually made like a Crash. Him and some other guys actually made like a Crash fan game that was like a 3D. And I don't think they ever actually got to the point where they released it, but it actually looked it was getting developed around the time that Mind Over Mutant and stuff was coming out, and it actually looked pretty good from what I could see. I don't remember the name of it. I think it was called Crystal's Wrath or something like that.
Well,
But like it was,
based on the next part of
it,
our story, we know for a fact that it never went anywhere because
I know,
um,
but legitimately, it actually looked like it was. It actually,
looked pretty good.
I liked the way it was looking. I liked the way it was looking up. It actually, I was more, I would have been more excited if that would have been
You
made
would have
into a
been
full
more
game than
excited to play
Mind
like
Over
a
Mutant.
fan made demo than like the actual legit game. Like that's
Yeah,
that's when you know that your franchise is in the shitter, when you
yeah,
get more excited about playing a fan made demo of something that doesn't even exist versus like the actual released game. so
yeah.
so yeah,
And
that is yeah.
honestly, the graphics on this game were probably yeah, better than
Better.
Titan.
Yeah, I mean that's an element we haven't spoke about too much. Yeah, but the I think you mentioned it briefly, but the declining graphic quality in Crash, especially when you have, other games that are coming out around this time that are just so superior. Um, I get Crash just got to a point where it couldn't compete anymore, and with that you have the death of Crash Bandicoot in 2008 with Mind Over Mutant. So for nearly 10 years after that, Crash was dead and gone, and we did not see nor hear anything about it until Phase 4, which we're going to talk about now, which is the resurrection of the once great Crash Bandicoot via the remaster trilogy in 2017, a couple of years ago. And this was honestly something that I didn't think that I would see happen ever, but I was actually really happy to see. And that was right around the time that I was getting a PS4. A little before that, I was, because I was a little late on the PS4 wagon, as you could tell. But I did get a PS4 before that, and I was actually really
When did you
excited.
get a PS4?
What's that?
When did you get a PS4?
I think I got PS4 in early 2017. I want to say was when I got it.
Uh, I got mine for Christmas of 2015.
Yeah,
Juliet
so
got
I
me
was
it.
I was a few years behind, but nonetheless, but this game actually, so the Crash Insane trilogy, which is a complete remaster and of the first three Crash single player platformers for PS1, um, and I
Well, we
have
all know.
yeah, and I have to say that this is beautiful. They just did a great job with this. It looks amazing. It plays amazing. It's really like the Crash Bandicoot of old. Obviously, it's nothing new here. It's just a re-release, but they did a great
Right.
job of bringing this to the PS4, and it really kind of like brought Crash back into the limelight, I think, to kind of showcase like what made the series so good in the first place. So I was really happy to see them come out with this. Obviously, we don't really have much new to talk about here. And then actually, just recently, a couple of weeks ago, we had the release of Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, which is a remaster slash re-release of Crash Team Racing, the other of those four games from the Naughty Dog slash Golden Era of Crash Bandicoot. And I know we've both played extensively, and again, they just did a beautiful job with it. It's really fun. It's really well done and put together. They actually um, released all of the tracks from Crash Nitro Kart as well on this. So this is kind of like our, I guess, our happy ending to the story is that we actually
Yeah.
got this stuff going here. So it's pretty nice. I like it a lot, and yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Throw it to
positive
me.
note. What's that?
Yeah, so I'll just say one thing before we get into actually the next part of the discussion, which is the canonical status of the Crash games.
Yep.
Is I was actually not excited at all for the remaster of Crash because I want a new Crash game and I still want a new Crash game and it hasn't happened yet. But I guess I could see the remaster as like a step in the right direction. But at the same time, I like what they did with it. I was not interested in it because I would actually not have bought it if it had not been bought for me as a gift because I did not care about replaying the Crash games because I'd already played them so many times. If I wanted to play them, I would have played the original version. I really don't think they added too much with the remaster, but I can appreciate that it was a good stepping stone. But my opinion on Crash Team Racing Nitro Field is that it was a much, much better idea and it worked a million times better because they basically combined Crash and Crash Nitro Kart and added in online play. So yeah, I feel like it's just much better value in terms of, and it's a much stronger step in the right direction for the series. And I think if it's capitalized on, it can set the stage for a new Crash game, which is really what the fans want at this point.
Yeah, that's definitely fair enough, and I think that's actually kind of the inspiration behind this whole podcast was the release of CTR Nitro Fueled, and the fact that
Right.
it so far surpassed expectations from everyone, myself included. Like when I first heard about it last year, I was like, oh, that's cool. They're going to remaster CTR like they did with the original trilogy. But then they ended up doing so much more with it. Like I mentioned, putting all the tracks from CTR and CNK together, all the playable characters, and then some. And then
Adding new
online,
ones.
adding new ones, adding online play. And then there's going to be DLC. More characters, more tracks. Um, this is really, could potentially be the rebirth of the franchise. And like you said, this could definitely be a stepping stone toward a brand new Crash game at some point within the next couple of years, which could be a really good thing too. So I'm actually really excited about the state of Crash, which is something that I can't say that I have been for a very long time. So it's definitely a positive thing.
Yeah, I agree. And next thing we need to talk about actually is the canonical status of the Crash
Yeah, we've been
Bandicoot
talking
games. Are
about
we
it
going to
all
keep this on the
all
same?
discussion. Yeah, so that was our history lesson on Crash Bandicoot from two
It went on a little.
long-standing fans. Yes, went on a little longer than expected, but if you've watched the Captain's Table podcasts before, you will know that's kind of the norm around here. But yeah, so now we're gonna get to talking about an interesting, side note, I guess you would say, in all of this is so all of that history we just gave you about the Crash Bandicoot franchise, what's actually canon in the story of Crash Bandicoot and what isn't. And that is actually, a pretty sizable debate amongst fans. So I'll start by saying this. The first three games, Crash 1, 2, and 3, um, there's pretty much no dispute amongst anyone that those games are canon because they all fit together very well. They all flow. Everything makes sense, from beginning to end, more or less. So we don't really have to talk about them because that's pretty much widely accepted that they are all canon. But there are some fans who will actually believe that those three games are the only games that are actually Crash canon and that everything else that followed is not. So, is that a valid argument? I don't know. Let's find out.
I would say, yeah. So I would say that in actuality,
Perfect
that
time to
is an
cue the
argument
toilet
that.
flush. Perfect timing.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, we're gonna flush that theory down the toilet. No, I'm just kidding. We can actually keep that theory on the table because I think it would make the most sense if we kind of just went through the Crash games and then kind of assess the canonical status of all of them individually. So the first, you just said the first three games are obviously canon. I would agree with that, and the reasoning is the first game obviously very clearly feeds directly into the second game, right? Crash 1 ends with Cortex getting defeated and falling off of his blimp after Crash beats him, right?
Sure.
Crash spins back Cortex's final laser blast. It hits Cortex. Cortex falls off his hoverboard and then he falls from the sky at the end of Crash 1. In Crash 2, it's revealed that he falls from the sky and lands in a cavern with a crystal.
Yes.
And that's how he gets his idea to uh, get the crystals and use them to take over the world or whatever. Now this is actually Crash 2 is where the series kind of there starts to be question about whether or not things are canon or not. In the end, Crash 2 actually kind of has two endings. One ending, the straight ending of the game, is where Crash delivers the crystals to Cortex, and Cortex then Crash, I guess, realizes Cortex is bad, or he won't deliver the crystals. Anyway, whatever, he beats Cortex, and Cortex doesn't get the crystals, right?
Yep.
But Cortex's space station is still there. At the end, the secret ending of Crash 2 is,
The
or the
100%
final
complete
ending when you
ending,
collect,
yeah.
yeah, when you 100% complete the game and collect all gems, is Crash actually hands the gems over to Embryo, and Embryo uses his laser to shoot Cortex Vortex out of the sky. Now, this makes perfect sense in the story of the first two games. Now, when you take into account the secret ending of the third game, this is where it starts becoming questionable. Is when you take this into account, given the secret ending of the third, the first, the true, I guess, true ending of the third game. Well, first of all, let's see how Crash 2 feeds into Crash 3. Crash 2
Well, yeah,
feeds into Crash
we
3
kind of
because
already
Cortex.
discussed that, but yeah,
Yeah, we
basically
discussed
the
how
secret, yeah,
Cortex
the secret ending
the se-
of Crash 2 is
it
was
has to be
100%. Yeah,
canon.
it
This
has to
this
be canon because that feeds directly into Crash 3. So that would set the precedent that the 100% complete ending of the game is canon. So if that with that precedent set, now you hit the problem of the 100% complete ending of Crash 3, which is,
right,
as you said before, which is Cortex and Entropy get turned into babies and sent back in time or some bullshit like that. Um, so yeah,
right,
that's where
yeah.
things start to get kind of muddy because obviously in the next game, which is CTR, that's not a factor. That it's not like you have baby Cortex or baby Entropy or anything like that. That's not a thing. It's
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I guess so. There's a couple things about this. The question is Crash Team Racing canon? And if it isn't, well, first of all, if it is, how did Cortex and Entropy get from being babies in the past to
back to normal.
racing in the present?
Yeah,
Yeah, back to normal and racing in the present, right?
yeah.
Uh, So, and then if Crash Team Racing is not canon, you have to figure out then where does the Crash series pick up after Crash 3, and how did Entropy and Cortex get back to normal, right?
Yes.
So the problem with both of these scenarios is that it is never explained, like what is they're fighting over Uka Uka. Also, that's the other thing. There's kind
Yeah.
of like between them, and they're fighting over
Tug of
Uka Uka.
war. Yeah, with the Uka Uka. Yep.
Right. So it doesn't make sense because I guess the time twister machine collapsed and sent him back to the past. So
Yes.
I guess maybe you could say like, okay, Entropy is and Cortex are like super geniuses. They maybe rebuilt the time twister or like figured out how to get back to the present,
But
right?
they're babies
Or
though.
like maybe or like
They're
maybe that ending is an alternate time. I guess it doesn't make sense. Maybe they grew up and then came back to the present. But this is never referenced in any future Crash games. So the canonical status of the secret ending of Crash 3 is it's questionable
yeah.
because like there was never like a logical resolution to that plot thread.
Yes.
So I guess that's the first problem. But I guess Crash 1 and 2 are 100% canon, and Crash 3 is entirely canon, except for maybe not that alternative end.
Yeah, and that's
Uh,
kind of the
I
argument that I would make. Is that I would think like typically secret endings to games, at least in my opinion anyway, are usually not like considered canon. Like you have some goofy shit that happens as like an alternate ending or whatever. Like
Yeah, so I don't know
whatever.
if you ever played Dragon Ball Z Budokai, the original one. There's an
Yeah.
alternate ending where like Krillin accidentally fuses with Cell, and then Yamcha and Tien defeat Cell.
Yeah. Exactly. There you go.
Like
My point
that
proven.
obviously didn't
Exactly.
happen.
Yeah.
That obviously
Exactly.
didn't happen.
Exactly. So that's my point. So I'm willing to kind of look the other way on that and just kind of say, that was just a joke, or it is what it is. So, but a lot of fans will actually argue that like that's the reasoning behind that's where the canon of Crash ends, is because that's where it was left in the 100% complete ending of Warped, was that. So, but I think that
Yeah,
that's
and they
just,
never picked up that plot
yeah, and they've
thread.
never picked up on
And
that.
but at the
But that
same
would
time,
mean that you would, if
you
you were
could
to
say
take
that the
that line
secret
of
this okay,
thinking, you would have to say that the majority of the games in the Crash Bandicoot series are not technically Crash canon. That's something that I wouldn't be comfortable saying personally. I wouldn't think that there's
so
3 canon Crash games and like 12 not canon Crash games. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. So I would be willing to say that just
well,
doesn't, no.
at the same time, here's another interesting thought.
Mhm.
Crash 1 has an alternate ending as well that is definitely not canon. I don't know if
Right.
you remember this.
Yes, where if you collect all of the gems to 100, the 100% complete ending on Crash 1 is Crash gets on a vulture with his then girlfriend Tawna and rides off into the sunset.
Without ever facing Cortex.
Yeah, without ever actually having to face Cortex.
Right. So the problem is like the whole beginning of Crash 2 is started by Cortex falling out of the sky after Crash defeats him.
Yep.
So there's no way that the 100% complete ending of Crash 1 is canon, even
Yes.
though there is no way that the 100% completion ending of Crash 2 is not canon,
Yes.
right?
Yes, so
So
it creates an interesting
maybe
paradox even within the. I mean, I kind of didn't expect to spend too much time on the original trilogy, but now that we're talking about it, it definitely creates an interesting paradox about the
right.
original trilogy.
So basically what we're just saying is there's no way that all of these games are canon because the alternate ending of Crash 1 is definitely not canon. The alternate ending of Crash 2 has to be canon, and the alternate ending of Crash 3, I mean, I guess the precedent of Crash 1 is not canon, Crash 2 is canon, or the endings of them. You could say that then because Crash 3's ending does not plausibly seem canon, like given the subsequent follow-up games, that therefore it is not canon.
Yes, yeah, and that would definitely be something that I would agree with. Um,
So I guess our verdict is Crash 1 is actually the only Crash game so far that's 100% canon is Crash 2
I guess so.
because
Yeah,
Crash 1 it's the only no it's the only possibility. It's only possibility
yeah, because
that Crash 1 is
we're
100%
trying to do what
canon. And
makes
I
most
guess you could actually
sense. Yeah.
right, I guess you could say Crash 3 is 100% canon, but if you did, that would mean that the alternate ending was never addressed and that would basically make the original trilogy of Crash the only canon game. But
Yeah,
we can't
which
stick with
I'm
that
not going
theory
to
because
say.
Yeah, that would cut us off too much. So I think what we're going to say is that Crash 1 is canon except for the alternate ending. The entirety of Crash 2 is canon, and then Crash 3 is canon except for the 100% ending where they end up in the past.
Yeah.
Either that or they somehow are able to make their way out of the past because there's just too many games subsequently that happen for us to
Yeah, no,
consider that to
I'm
be.
comfortable. I don't think we need to spend too much more time on this, but
Yeah.
I'm comfortable definitely saying from a common sense standpoint that um, everything about the first three Crash games is canon except the 100% complete ending on Crash 1 and Crash 3. Other than those two things, I think everything else you see is canon. And that's a good
Yeah,
place
that
to
sounds
leave
about
that.
right. That sounds about right.
Now moving on to CTR. Now this is kind of an
So,
interesting, another interesting paradox that you create with CTR, which is okay. The events of CTR, like if you really think about them, okay, it's a race for the world or whatever, and then they end up winning. So at the end of the day, nothing's really any different than it was when you started. So
but the
right,
problem is, first of all, the the events of CTR are referenced in Crash Nitro Kart. That's probably like obvious, uh, the
argument for
first
why
obvious.
CTR should be considered canon in the Crash universe.
Yeah, so like Nitro Kart, if CTR is not canon, Nitro Kart is definitely not canon, right? The
Yes.
second thing is nitrous oxide appears in multiple. His first and only appearance at this point is in Crash Team Racing, and he appears in multiple other games with no real explanation on how or why he is there. So the only plausible explanation for how or why he is there would have to be that CTR is canon, right?
Yes.
And those games that nitrous oxide appears in include Crash Bash, Crash Twinsanity, and Crash Nitro Kart.
Yes.
So if you're throwing out Crash Team Racing, you have to throw out all of those other games. Now there
Yes.
could be an argument made for Twinsanity still being canon because the appearance of nitrous oxide was just a gag,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And that game had a lot of them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, then we'd kind of have to go through all of the Crash games with a fine tooth comb and find all the gags
Yeah, and that's
that
just not going to
may or may
happen.
not be, yeah, that may or may not be canon.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so yeah. So, but I, based on that reasoning alone, I'm 100% fine with saying that CTR is part of the canon, because it does make sense. Even though the events of the game, because like it's the classic. Everything is the same as when it started at the end of the story. So, in that respect, it's the events of the game are kind of inconsequential. But at the same time, I feel like you said, if you were to try and argue that CTR was not canon, you would have to throw out like too many other games. So I feel like saying CTR is canon is a pretty safe statement, especially when you consider that those four games were the original, you know, Crash games were the under the Naughty Dog banner. So saying
Yeah. Although,
trying to say that CTR is a spin-off when it was under the same banner and everything fit together so well is just kind of like nitpicky, and I'm not really
it
interested in
kind of the
doing.
thing is though, I feel like it seems like CTR was supposed to be a spin-off at the time it was made, but
Eh,
it's like the fact of the matter is they kind of like picked up on plot threads from the game. And the other thing is like I'm pretty sure they even mentioned in like I'm pretty sure it was even referenced in tag team racing that Crash has raced before. So like if you're I think tag team racing would probably also have to be thrown out if you took out CTR.
yeah, so I think it's pretty safe to say that CTR is canon. Like it just makes too much sense,
Well,
I think.
I would say that CTR honestly was not originally meant to be canon, but at this point it has to be considered canon in the series. That would be my like I just looking
Sure.
at the game, I don't think the game was meant to be canon initially.
I could see why you would say that. I mean, like I said, CTR, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, was kind of like, Naughty Dog like firing its last shot basically because I'm sure they knew that they were going to be done with Crash after that. So,
So
um,
actually, Naughty Dog only had a 3 game contract, and CTR was actually an extra game tacked onto the end of the contract.
there you
And
go.
they actually wanted to be done before CTR came out. And then once CTR was out, they knew even when they were developing the game that it was definitely good. They thought actually Crash 3 was going to be their last game, but
Yeah.
then they knew when they were developing CTR
So
that it
that
was
might be your
100% going
your
to be their last
explanation
game.
for your goofy baby Cortex and baby Entropy going to the past ending
R-
of Crash Warped was that if they figured that
right.
that was going to be their last game, there's let's end it on a joke, and then
Yeah, because
they
Naughty
turned
Dog,
out
it
to do
really
another
is
one.
like that. They really are like that type of developer to do something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. Oh, for those of you who don't know Naughty Dog, the younger viewers, you might know them from Uncharted because they do that too. Anyway, So
Anyway, so Crash Team
so
Racing,
plugging
we're gonna
along,
have
I
to
think
say it
it's
was.
pretty safe
We're
to
gonna
say, yeah, that that's canon. Um,
well, like I said, we're gonna have to say it's canon, even though I don't think it was supposed to be originally.
Gotcha.
So let's
So
move on to
moving
Crash
on
Bash.
to Crash Bash. That's the next game in the series chronologically, and I'll take the lead on this one. I think because I have some pretty strong opinions about Crash Bash, obviously, but I'll keep it short and sweet by saying I don't think, based purely on a common sense standpoint, and the fact that nothing in this game makes any sense whatsoever in the universe of Crash Bandicoot. I'm going to say that this game is not canon in the Crash universe, that this game is just a spin-off, because if you go back to what we said about the story of Crash Bash, you have Aku Aku and Uka Uka summon the forces of good and evil to fight for the planet. Uka Uka willingly surrenders Tiny and Dingo to the good guys. So Tiny and Dingo, two long-standing henchmen of evil, are good guys in this game for no reason other than Aku Aku was like, I don't have enough players, give me two. And Uka Uka, being evil, says, sure, you want a fair fight? Sure, because I'm evil, which is still one of
This
the
game is
stupidest.
just
Yeah,
stupidly
it's.
executed, to be honest, because Aku Aku could have brought about like Embryo should have been on Aku Aku's side, or like what about I
Polar
guess
and Purah that
Tana,
were
or
literally
like
just in the
Polar,
last game.
yeah,
Like it, yeah. So
or even like who else? Like Penta, I guess his
yeah,
allegiance is kind of like questionable, but he could have been another one.
yeah, or potentially even Fake Crash because he has questionable allegiance too. But
Well,
um,
Fake Crash, I think Fake Crash was decidedly evil until I think it was Entrance. In Entrance, he actually starts helping Crash, but until then,
yeah.
he was decidedly evil.
Sure, but in any event, my point is this: I don't think that, and then the other thing, the only other argument I think we have to make about um, Crash Bash not being
Oh, so
canon
that's actually another
is
thing.
the alternate,
Yeah,
or is the evil, like, because obviously you can choose to play as either the good guys or the bad guys, Team Aku or Team Uka, and then if you play as Team Aku, the good guys win and everything goes back to normal. But if you play as Team Uka, then the
yeah,
bad guys win and Uka Uka takes over the world, and so like that makes literally no sense whatsoever. And obviously that would be, as you mentioned before, like a plot thread that would have never been explained or picked up on in any subsequent game. Therefore, it can't be
right.
canon.
Well, I don't know if you ever played Infamous, right? Did you?
I did, yes,
You played Infamous?
I did the first one.
So that is a good and an evil ending for that game. But if you play the second one, pretty obvious that the good ending is the one that actually happened.
Well, sure, of
Uh,
course.
but I think like in Crash Bash, you could make the argument that the evil ending is obviously cannot be canon just because of the way it is executed. Although, like speaking just like as an aside, the evil ending being canon would have been actually something super interesting that they could have springboarded off on the next Crash game, where Uka Uka actually like conquers the world, and then like the next game you have to like unconquer it or something, right? Like that would
Yeah,
have been a really
that would
interesting
actually
plot
been
thread.
an interesting plot point to pick up on. Yeah,
Yeah, but that's obviously not canon because that like it's never talked about or mentioned again, so that obviously never happened, right?
yeah.
But you could make a argument for the Aku Aku winning, like the good guys winning,
But
is the canon ending because I
but
don't
even
vote.
if you make
I
that
hold up,
argument, that still doesn't erase all the other nonsense of the game, like Tiny and Dingo
right?
being on
Hold up,
Aku
hold up.
Aku's
I'm gonna
side and
right.
Embryo being on
Hold up,
Cortex's side,
hold up,
and
hold up. I'm gonna
Rillaroo
get to
in
that. So
general makes no
right, I
sense.
get, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna talk about it, but uh, so yeah, the problem I was gonna say was the fact that none of these things are ever referenced again, and none of these like the new character Rillaroo never appears in any subsequent game, and is just basically was a one-off for this game. Like that is honestly like the main thing that confirms that like there is no other Crash game that was ever a playable character. Uh, eh, I guess with the exception of maybe like yeah, there's a couple exceptions, but like just the fact that Rillaroo like existed and then never existed before, and then for some reason existed in this game, and he's like Donkey Kong's drunk brother, his like drunk stupid brother. It's just it's I don't. Also, another interesting aside. Apparently, Rillaroo is a recycled concept from like one of the previous games, like concept drawings or sketches or something.
Oh, like they were gonna put
But
him. He was gonna be like a henchman in one of the previous games, but they decided
well,
not to
they were
because he
basically just
sucks.
coming. Yeah, I think they were just coming up with ideas for like animals that could be like mutated animals or whatever. And I think I think it was called a. They actually called him Kangorilla was originally what he was called,
Mm.
like Kangorilla instead of
That
a
that
Rilla.
probably
Which
actually that
actually
sounds better than his actual name. So
I I agree. I think Kangorilla actually sounds better than Rilla. Like Kangorilla actually sounds kind of like menacing and tough.
it
But
does.
Rillaroo just sounds like a fucking idiot.
Yeah, circus pants.
He sounds like a rip. He sounds like a Ripper, like discount dollar store Ripperoo.
Yeah,
But
exactly. So yeah,
but
yeah,
mixed with Donkey Kong. But I think like the main problem with this game on why it's not, because you could just make an argument, the good side ending is canon, but like the main problem with this game is that its canonical status is that Rillaveru's existence. Uh, these this weird tournament that kind of doesn't seem like it would have happened, and just the way the whole tournament went about with like Dingo and Tiny are now good guys, and that's never referenced again. It's just there's too many things that happened in this game that are just don't make sense in the Crash universe and are never referenced again.
yes. So yeah, so I think we would officially say that this game is not canon. So
I would
um,
say my opinion is that the evil ending is 100% not canon. I would say I would give a 50% to the good ending being canon. So I'm gonna say that it's like this game is 20, maybe even less than 50. I'm gonna say like maybe 25%. No, 20% canon. This game is 20% canon.
I think you're just splitting hairs at that point. But yeah, I'm just gonna
Well,
go. Yeah.
it's more canon than some other games.
Yeah, I guess. So, so then moving along, we get to the Wrath of Cortex, which is next. Now, um, this game is a lot of dumb stuff again, going back to it, but I think that it actually should be considered canon just kind of from like a logical progression, like a progression of characters and story standpoint, because if you were to consider this game not canon, then you would have to again, the existence of crunch would have to be explained in some other way, which it can't be. So then you would have to uh, discount,
Rule out every single game that Crunch ever appears in, which is
which is
basically
actually
every
just
game
about
after
all of
this.
them after this, because Crunch
Yeah.
becomes a pretty sizable force on Crash's side after this game. So that in and
Plus,
of itself would be enough for me to say that this game has to be canon.
the one argument I could see about this game not being
The
canon
masks,
is
the other
that
masks.
what's that? Yeah, the elemental masks that show up and then are never seen again.
Yeah, that's a pretty big
They just
problem.
they come out of the ether, but you could easily just say that like I'm pretty sure at the end of the first game they got like locked away, or at the end of this game they got like locked away, or I don't know. You come up with some excuse
Yeah,
like
they
that.
they they came up with
Plus, like the
some.
fact that they were yeah, like the thing is, like everybody, like every series who has a new antagonist show up, it's like they were never there before, but now they're a problem. It's just kind of how story writing goes with coming up with new bad guys.
Yeah,
Especially when
so
you don't plan the whole series out from the get go.
exactly. So
But I think yeah, this game is definitely one. I'd say it's one of the. It has to be canon because if you're going to consider any game outside of the original trilogy canon, this game has to be canon. Even if CTR isn't canon, this game 100% is because nothing in CTR is ever referenced in this game. But they do reference all of Cortex's defeats by Crash. So like obviously the first three games happened in the
yeah.
universe that this game happened.
Well, not only that, but as you mentioned before, the end of this game actually directly feeds into Twin Sanity. Um,
Yeah. So that's
so
another thing is that the you know what? I just realized a weird pattern.
what's that?
It's almost like so. You know how everybody considers the mainline Crash games basically goes one, two, three, uh, Wrath of Cortex, Twin Sanity, and then Crash of the Titans, Mind Over Mutant.
Yeah,
I guess that's the main line of Crash games.
right. The
It's
single
kind of weird that
players.
like the yes, it's like every other game, the secret ending is the canon ending. Because think about it, Crash 1, the secret ending is not canon.
Yeah.
Crash 2, the secret ending is canon.
Yep.
Crash 3, secret ending cannot be canon. Wrath of Cortex, the secret ending has to be canon for Twin Sanity to happen.
Yep.
Twin Sanity's secret ending or final ending. Actually, no. The main ending of Twin. Well, I guess we'll get to that. The
Yeah.
main ending of Twin Sanity can't be canon.
Yeah,
that's
but
the,
yeah, we're gonna run
that's the
into a
problem with that.
situation like that where we had before with like Crash 1 and 3, where when you get to the certain end of the game, it's like it kind of can't be if you're building off that for the future. But yeah, so that's Wrath of Cortex. So
Yeah. It's certainly, I'd say Wrath of Cortex. If any game outside of the original trilogy is considered canon, then Wrath of Cortex is canon.
Yeah, I would agree with that definitely. So then we get to the handhelds, huge adventure and trance. We're kind of running late here, so I'm gonna try to power through these, and hopefully, maybe these will lump together, because they kind of feed off each other. Um, I'd say, in my opinion, the Huge Adventure and Entranced, in my opinion, are canon to the Crash story,
And
because of common sense logic, the way the storyline progresses, everything kind of makes relative sense within the world of Crash. You have the same good guys, the same bad guys, the same general concept of Cortex trying to take over the world. Everything just kind of makes sense, within these games. Yes, there's some outlying factors that don't, but I think for the most part, everything makes pretty decent amount of sense here in these
okay,
games.
so I actually have a problem with that.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
what's that?
so Huge Adventure supposedly picks up immediately after Warped, despite being released after Wrath of Cortex.
Hmm.
But Huge Adventures, the problem, a couple problems with Huge Adventure. First of all, placing it in the timeline of the series is kind of awkward.
Yeah.
Uh, like that's the first problem with the canonical status of Huge Adventure. But the problem is, if you rule out one of these games, you almost need to rule out both of them because they're supposed to be sequel. Like Entrance is supposed to be a
Oh, it's not
sequel to Huge
almost. You
Adventure,
have
right?
to. Yeah, if you would find a
Yeah.
reason to discount.
Well, I could actually see a. Uh, oh, so actually, apparently, according to this, uh, Entrance actually happens after Twin Sanity. That's weird. I don't know if this is accurate, but
That doesn't
Entrance
sound
supposedly
accurate.
happens after Twin Sanity. Although it came out after. Hold on. Maybe this is just someone just wrote this. It's not true. I don't think it's true. Uh,
Yeah.
okay, but and the fact is, huge placing Huge Adventure is weird. The planetary minimizer, like the fact that Cortex can shrink the Earth down to like a miniature size, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense because like if Cortex has this amazing technology, like where the hell, like why were his plans so terrible before this and like so
Yeah.
rickety before this? Like
Fair
that doesn't
enough.
really make sense.
Yeah.
Although I guess you could come up with the whole escalation of stakes thing that they kind of have to
Yeah,
do in
so I mean
series like this.
that's what I was saying. Like to
But
me, this stuff makes relative sense. Like there is stuff like that doesn't, but I think more of it, is logical than that isn't. So
okay, I'm actually going to have to take a big stance right here, and I'm going to say that both of these games aren't canon, which by uh, result of that also means that Nitro Kart is also not canon. So I'm going to say that both of these games and Nitro Kart are not.
okay, yeah, yeah. We'll agree to disagree there because the
The
next game we
only
were
the
gonna get into is Nitro
the
Kart.
only problem the only problem with saying that is that Entrance appears in Twin Sanity in one scene. If you
Yes,
remember,
he
when they
does.
get to the treasure room in the 10th dimension, Entrance appears. But you could make the argument that that Entrance is not necessarily the same Entrance as this or alternate universe, or the fact that they're in the 10th dimension, that the rules just don't apply.
Yes, yeah. Again, um,
So, though, I'm going to say that these games are not canon because of the fact that, like, A, the planetary minimizer does not make sense. B, this game supposedly happens immediately after Crash Warped, and then Entrance supposedly happens after Wrath of Cortex. No, it happens after this game and after Twin Sanity, but they never reference Wrath of Cortex. That doesn't make sense either.
yeah,
So
I
I'm just
think
going to say that
the
both of these
waters get
get
muddied a little bit because obviously we mentioned these were
some of these
handhelds.
games were
These are
kind of released simultaneously.
Yeah, so in 2002, Huge Adventure was released. In 2003, Entranced and Nitro Kart were released. So it's and also like I said with handhelds with Huge Adventure and Entranced being Game Boy Advance games, like it kind of muddies the water too. Like cuz typically handheld games kind of don't follow like the exact same timeline or lineage or canon as main console games, so that does kind of muddy the water. I would say because I'm trying to go with the most inclusive model of the Crash universe that I can fit because I don't like the idea of like spin-offs and like stuff happening and it's not canon but it happened but it didn't happen and all that bullshit. Like I'm not a fan of that. So I try
Yeah, the
to
problem
craft
is
like
though,
the
like
most inclusive model of something I can. So to me, like the fact that yes, like the planetary minimizer is a little bit of a problem, but that can be explained. I think the probably my biggest biggest problem with calling this game canon is the fact that they say that it happens immediately after Warped, but there's no possible way that it could have. And then with Entrance, the same thing. Like they say it happens after
No, I'm thinking is
Twin
no. So it's
Sanity.
possible. The thing is, it's possible that Huge Adventure could have happened after Warped, but it's not possible that Entrance could have then followed it.
Yeah.
So it's possible that Huge Adventure is canon, but Entrance isn't. But then if you say that, then it's what the hell about Entrance, right?
Well, yeah.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying like I'm just gonna throw both of these games out because it just muddies it up too much. Like there's too many like
Or
unanswered.
yeah, it does muddy it up, but or you could also make the argument that in the timeline you could say well, because you say Entrance is supposed to happen after Wrath of Cortex, right?
Yeah,
In
so
the
it doesn't
timeline.
make sense
So
because
you could go Warped to Huge Adventure to Wrath of Cortex to Entrance. So
I
that
guess it could, but Entrance is also supposed to take place. No, that doesn't make sense though because Twin Sanity happens right after Wrath of Cortex.
okay, so then you would have to go Warped to
So
Huge Adventure to Wrath of Cortex to Twin Sanity, then to Entranced.
right, that would be the only order that makes sense, but it doesn't because
And then to
Entrance
Nitro Kart
is
afterward.
supposed. Yes, and Nitro Kart also happened. The placing of Nitro Kart.
See, again, yeah,
Uh,
the water gets muddied because like all these games are released like around within like a year or two of each other, and it definitely gets confusing. I would like to think that they are because just for the simple fact of like you have Entrance, who's a character who reoccurs in a few other games. Again with Entrance, the same thing with Huge Adventure is the storyline is kind of interesting. It does make a degree of sense, relative degree of sense. So I'm willing to say, look the other way on some of the inconsistencies and say that it is. But Nitro Kart, you already kind of said by process of elimination, you have to rule that out. Again, like I would like to think that. Yeah, Nitro Kart is kind of a weird one for me. I mean, I would like to think it is canon because I like to try and include, in my mind as many games in canon as I can. But at the same time, Nitro Kart has like kind of the same conundrum as a game like Tag Team Racing, which we're going to get to in a second, which is like the events of the game, like well, from start to finish, like the events of Nitro Kart are like okay, nothing changed from beginning to end of the game, and like there's a lot of characters you see in Nitro Kart, like all the aliens and Velo and everything, and the bosses that you never see again after Nitro Kart. But
yeah. So here's the thing.
yeah,
Like I said, I'm gonna throw out Nitro Kart. I'm gonna throw out and Huge Adventure and Entrance and Nitro Kart also because the existence of Velo and him take like the two endings don't really make sense because the in the ending of the Cortex version
hmm
of Nitro Kart, Tiny basically becomes the ruler of the galaxy.
yeah, that
So
was pretty
that
funny.
obviously that obviously didn't happen. And when Team Bandicoot wins, Crash like hands. I guess you could say that the Team Bandicoot ending makes sense because Crash gives the staff back to Velo and he goes back to like ruling the universe. And yeah,
Yeah.
Crash goes back to like sleeping on the beach and being retarded. So
Yeah,
like,
so I would actually so my argument as Nitro Kart, that's what I was going to say was that I would argue that the Team Bandicoot ending for Nitro Kart could be canon
then
and
why isn't Crash Bash canon then?
because nothing else that happens in Crash Bash makes any sense. That's why
Yeah,
cuz
but
like you have
nothing
to
else that happens in Nitro Kart really makes sense if you think about
sure
it.
it does. Well, it doesn't make as little sense as Crash Bash though. That's the thing. Like you don't have Tiny and Dingo Dial being good guys for no reason. You don't have Embryo
Yeah,
showing up.
instead you have Dingo Dial and Polar and Purra just brainwashed by Entrance
Yeah,
for
but
no
that
reason,
actually does
with
make a
no
certain degree of
explanation.
sense, though,
And
because
then
that's what
and then all
Entrance
of a sudden hold up, and then
does.
all of a sudden they're hold up, and then all of a sudden they're back on the other side on the next game.
Well, not
All
necessarily,
of a
because
sudden
the
they're back.
next game is Twin Sanity, and well, I guess we have
Yeah,
the
and all of a
purple,
sudden Dingo.
but
Yeah, but all of a sudden Dingo Dial is back on the side of whatever. Plus, the other thing is, like I said, placing Nitro Kart doesn't like Nitro Kart has to happen after Wrath of Cortex because Crunch is in it on the side of Team Bandicoot. But
yeah, I guess I
we
could see.
know
All
that
right, all
Twin
right,
Sanity we
yeah,
know that Twin Sanity picks up after the end of Wrath of Cortex.
yeah,
So Nitro Kart therefore would have to take place after Twin Sanity.
yeah. So I guess Nitro Kart. I guess there's just too many conflicts with other games. So I guess so I'm gonna say my official stance on this clump of games. I'm gonna say I think Huge Adventure and Entrance can be canon, but I guess Nitro Kart can't be just simply because of placement. And it
I'm gonna
just
say throw them all out, and also because of the precedent of Game Boy Advance games not really being canon, and a lot of times, so or like handheld games not really being canon. So I'm gonna say they do not exist
all right.
in the Crash series. I'm gonna
Yeah,
say
so
Entrance.
moving along from all that mess, um, we have something that's a little more cut and dried. We have Crash Purple now. I don't want to spend too much time on
No,
this
we
one.
skipped we skipped we skipped Twin
No,
Sanity, didn't
Purple
we?
comes
Or no,
before
was
Twin
that coming out?
Sanity. Um,
Which came first, Purple or
Purple came
Twin
first,
Sanity?
so that's
Purple
why
came
I'm trying
first,
to go in
actually.
chronological order, and Purple did come first. Yes, according to what I'm reading.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm just gonna throw Purple out for a couple of different reasons. One, because of kind of what you said, the general rule of thumb of of like handhelds not really being canon a lot of the time. Not only that, but like the game is just like it's basically a fanfic. Essentially, it's like a crossover game. So it doesn't feel like it should be canon. Like nothing about this game, and again, I haven't played the game, but I've read a lot about it. I've watched the gameplay. Nothing that I see or read about this game feels like it should be canon. So I'm just gonna say it just doesn't make sense. Like it's just a crossover. It's a cute crossover, and nothing more. So I don't really have too much to
Okay.
say about it.
I'm going to disagree with you. I'm actually going to say that Crash Purple. Oh shoot! Sorry, dropped my phone. I'm going to say that Crash Purple is canon, despite the fact that I don't put Entrance, Tag Team Racing, or Huge Adventure as canon. I'm going to say
Okay.
Crash Purple is canon because of the fact that it does not violate any of the rules of canon of Crash Bandicoot, and
Okay.
Spyro does have an appearance in Twin Sanity, although he's also appears in the same scene that Entrance appears in. But at the same time, Spyro has also been somewhat referenced in other Crash games. He's going to be a playable character in Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled.
Yes.
Yeah, uh, and Nina appears in this game, which is weird because Nina came in and Twin Sanity, which came out after this game.
Well, that's weird.
Strange. Yeah, and let's see, but I mean,
Yeah, that's a lot harder
there
than I
really
thought.
isn't.
I'm not gonna lie.
Honestly,
Placing this
there
stuff
really
is a lot
isn't.
harder than I thought.
There re- so this game might be canon because Spyro. I don't know, man. Plus Spyro and Crash, I just get the.
Well, yeah, then you have that whole
I'm gonna say this game
Skylanders
is.
thing with Spyro and
Yeah,
Crash
they.
too, which kind of does give you
Then
the impression that they do exist within the same universe.
yeah, but I'm gonna say that. So this game, I'm gonna say that Huge Adventure, Entrance, and Nitro Kart are definitely not canon. But I'm gonna say this game might be canon. Like I'm gonna say because I just haven't
Maybe.
played it enough. I just haven't really played much of this game or any of this game or like read enough about it to really make the determination one way or another. But I'm gonna say this game might be canon.
Yeah.
Uh, but I'm still gonna stick with Huge Adventure, Entrance, and Nitro Kart are all not canon.
Fair enough. Okay, so moving along from that, we have Twin Sanity. We already talked about it a little bit before.
Just because Twin Sanity is so kind of interwoven into all
Yeah,
these
it
games'
really
stories.
is. Yeah, well, everything that happens in this era of Crash games, like pretty much like the 2001 to like 2004 like era of Crash games, like all those games are kind of convoluted and like woven together a little bit, so it's hard to kind of get a feel for them all. I could definitely see it going either way. As far as I could see the justification for consider it canon and not considering it canon, to be honest, but yeah, as far as Twin
So
Sanity goes, I would have to say, in my opinion, I would call it canon, just because it does flow like the ending of Wrath of Cortex kind of does flow into the beginning of Twin Sanity. There's a lot of it is tricky though because there's a lot of gags and humor and stuff like that play a part in Twin Sanity, perhaps more so than in any other Crash game. So it's like
yeah.
it's hard to
Well, I'm gonna say this: if
yeah
if if any game after Wrath of Cortex is canon, it has to be Twin Sanity, simply due to the fact that it picks up directly where Wrath of Cortex ends.
yeah. So yeah, so I'm okay with that. I'm okay with calling Twin Sanity canon. I feel like it is. Now the only one thing that poses a little bit of a problem about Twin Sanity being canon is that final cutscene in Twin Sanity that we alluded to earlier. And the difficult thing about this is that this isn't even like 100% or like a secret ending. Like this is the legit ending of the game where Cortex gets shrunk and
Crash
trapped
gets
in Crash's
Cortex.
head.
Yeah, Cortex gets transported inside of Crash's brain somehow. But I mean, even though they never showed him escaping, I could easily see them coming up with like Engine got him out,
Yeah, yeah.
Nina
So
got
that's
him out.
that's that's what I was gonna say is my argument for why this game is still canon, despite that, because obviously the whole. I mean, this game
It's
is
not as
full of gags.
unsolvable.
Yeah, this game was
It's not
full
as
of
well. First of all,
gags. So
that too, and also it's not as unsolvable of a situation as Cortex and Entropy being babies back in time.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, like Cortex being shrunk inside Crash's head is like you said. It's not a. I mean, technically, like since nothing has ever been picked up on that thread after the fact, you could try to argue like, oh, well, then it can't be canon because of that, nonsense. But at the same time, like you said, you could like fabricate some bullshit, like Engine got him out, or somebody else got Uka Uka got him out, like somebody got him out somehow, and it's not as unsolvable of a situation like you said at the end of Crash Warped or
Or
even Crash 1 for that matter with their 100% complete endings.
I think at the end of this, I'm going to postulate 5 alternate Crash canon theories that all work.
Oh
Anyway,
god.
let's move on from Twin Sanity, and I think Twin Sanity has to it basically it's pretty much canon. The only thing that would really be called into question on whether or not it's canon is the appearance of Oxide in the initial the first gathering of the bad guys.
Yeah.
Some people have also pointed to the fact that Crunch is in this scene as it not being canon because of the fact that Crunch has been a good guy ever since Crash Wrath of Cortex. And the thing is, what they don't realize is that Crunch's appearance with all the other bad guys was obviously a gag because Cortex says that he arranged a birthday party for Crash
And
and
Crush
Crunch
is
has a
holding the
birthday
birthday
cake. Yes,
cake.
and he's looking around, so Crunch thought it was actually a birthday party. That's the joke.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, so that's that. So people who are saying that it's not canon because of that can
And
yeah.
he's like, I've organized a little gathering, like a birthday party, but the exact opposite.
Yeah, exactly. So people who think that you're wrong. So no, just stop. But yeah. So
I
that's
actually saw people saying that on Crash forums back in the day. By the way,
oh, and they were like 100% serious. Like, yeah,
yeah,
that's no, stop that. All right. So
but
moving along because we are way over time as usual here. So
tag team racing.
tag team racing, really quick. I'm gonna say tag team racing. I'm gonna kind of be undecided about that for basically for the fact that the game may as well have never happened. Like the game was just one big gag basically to me. Like it could have never
Yeah,
happened. Like it was a non sequitur. It basically just didn't need to happen, may as well have never happened in terms of the grand scheme of the Crash franchise. So I'm going to say it could have happened. It could have, like, the game happening or not happening has the same effect on the Crash franchise, which is none. So, so
yeah. So
that's my
I'm
stance.
gonna say I'm gonna say it's definitely not canon for a couple of reasons. First of all, the new characters in the premise are just utterly like pointless.
Ridiculous and pointless. Yeah.
Sec- Second of all, apparently I'm reading online that Radical themselves actually claim that Crash Tag Team Racing was not canon. Like the
Well,
developers of
there's
the
a pretty
game actually.
big smoking gun right there that could have saved us like
Yeah.
10 seconds, but sure.
Yeah, and the third thing would be, I mean, even though like I'm not sure if that's actually true, but someone on Reddit is claiming that they said that, so take that
Okay.
with a grain of salt. But and the other thing is that like I said, the characters are never mentioned before or after, and the ending is never mentioned before or after, and basically anything that happened in this game is never mentioned before or after. So we're just gonna have to say, I think honestly, Tag Team Racing is probably the game that you can most easily dismiss as not canon because it has like
It has
no
nothing to
ties
do with
to any other
anything
Crash
else
game.
before or after.
Yeah, like honestly, I feel like tag team racing is actually the easiest to dismiss as non-canon, and that's probably why I'd say we're just going to dismiss it outright, right?
Sure, that's fine. So then we have
Although, because of the fact that it's so easy to dismiss as non-canon, would also make it super easy to just throw it in the series because it could have happened,
yeah,
right?
well that feeds to my point is like I said, the game happening in canon or not happening in canon has the exact same effect on the series as a whole, which is
Basically, so
nothing,
I'm
which
gonna say, basically, I think we basically come to the agreement that is this game canon or not. Uh, you can decide. It doesn't matter. That's the
yeah, it doesn't
answer.
matter. That's the answer. Is it doesn't matter. So yeah, moving
Yeah.
along, we have Crash Boom Bang. I think this is the one game that I think is indisputably not canon because it is just
Right.
complete and utter nonsense. There's no
Yes,
part of
the
this that
plot of
makes
this
any
game.
sense on any level.
Yeah, this game was made by people who never had anything to do with Crash. They had no clue what they were doing. They just brought back characters for no reason. Like the story makes zero sense. $100 million by the Viscount, who's a character you've never heard of. Crash is like rich. I think at the end of this game, he gets like super rich from he gets the $100 million or whatever, or he gets the power gem. Or no, he steals the power gem and wishes for like unlimited Wampa fruit or some shit. It's just the whole thing is just
Yeah.
yeah. It's
So
supposed because that's like the power gem. It like gives you like well, they'll use or like one wish or something like I think it's
yeah,
just
so we already
this.
spent time talking about why this is horrible, so we don't need to waste any
Also,
more on it.
if this game was canon, I wouldn't want to live in the universe where this game is a canon Crash Bandicoot game.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So we're just gonna say it's not. Yeah, it's to make things better for ourselves, which is fine. So then
so finally we have Crash over Titans and Crash Mind over Mutant, which kind of is a package deal. It's either they
yeah,
are or they aren't together. And I honestly feel like the fact like both of these games were kind of supposed to be a soft reboot for the series, and the
hmm
fact of the matter is there's never been an actual, we're not counting like the mobile games or like yeah, the mobile games or anything, there's never really been an actual follow-up to these games, so their status as canon is kind of hard to decide because we don't know if they are going to follow. I would actually assume the answer is no, just because of the way that Crash is kind of like they've gone the remaster route, and like
yeah.
the
With the
new games are
with
not.
the rebirth of Crash via the remaster, it doesn't seem like this is anything that they would want to keep in canon in the Crash series.
Yeah, although I think at the time that they were made, they were definitely meant to be canon. It's
Oh
kind of like
yeah,
the opposite
absolutely.
situation of CTR.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, because that was supposed to be the new direction. I mean, we already talked about it, but that was supposed to be the new direction that the franchise was supposed to be going in, and it crashed and burned, pun intended again. I'm sorry, I had way too many. There's just it's so easy because Crash is so easy to pun off of. It's anyway. Um,
Right.
because
So the
everything
other
in
thing is,
Crash is a pun anyway already, so it's easy to
so
yeah.
these games are they're the thing is they are. I feel like they're either like an alternate universe. I honestly feel like the best way to describe them is they're an alternate universe.
It's a
Like
universe I don't
I
want to live in. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, because like I said, I think they were meant to be like a soft reboot, and they were supposed to be canon. But like going forward, they're probably not going to be.
Yeah, because if there
And
is
then
a
the
new
last thing
Crash
we,
game, yeah, if there is a new Crash game after Titans and Mind Over Mutant, following the remasters, I can almost certainly guarantee you, or at least I would hope and pray that they're not going to pick up where either of those games left off, so where Mind Over Mutant
right.
left
So
off
then the last
specifically.
two things we have to address are Skylanders, Thumping Wampa Island,
Oh
and
God,
the Skylanders Academy. And I don't know if you know anything about these. If you
I know
don't, let me
nothing
just
about
take it.
any
Can I
of
just
that. No.
Okay, so Thumpin' Wumpa Islands, I actually have it because I bought the Skylanders with that just for the Crash figure. I've never opened it. I still have the Crash and Cortex figure, but I actually bought it.
Awesome.
Essentially, I guess what happens is there's something having to do with some like Wampa festival or some crap like that, and Crash like the Wampa Islands are like alive and they're making like earthquakes or something. I don't know. It's weird. That's like the story of the game, and Crash has to basically like do something before the island gets destroyed or some crap. I don't know. But
Okay.
the thing is, this is actually accepted apparently in the Crash community as being canon and is happening like after all the other stuff. So like this would kind of like rule out Mind Over Mutant and Titans as being canon. Because everybody has like their old type design. It's very similar to their designs are actually not like the same, but they're more similar to the
They're not like
remaster
completely
designs than
ruined
the
like they were in Crash of the Titans and Mind Over Mutant.
right.
Gotcha.
And let me see. This came out in let's see the year 2000. What the hell? 2016,
Okay.
and it was just a level in Skylanders. It was a Crash Bandicoot level.
Okay.
Sky.
I mean, I don't think we
Uh,
really need to spend too much time talking
So
about that, but
I think that this one I would consider this canon, but then Skylanders Academy, apparently Skylanders has a TV show, and in
right.
the TV show Crash Bandicoot appeared and he talked and he had an Australian accent.
Okay. Yeah, I'm unaware of any of that.
Yeah, so apparently everybody's saying, and from what I see about this, it apparently happened during the events of Crash 1. So it seems like it was almost like a retelling of the first Crash game because I think Tawna appears in it too,
Oh, really?
or
Interesting.
something like that. Yeah, so it's actually like a retelling of Crash 1, which would also make it not canon. Definitely not canon.
Well, if Crash
So
talked, that throws it out the window right there because
I
Crash has
mean,
never talked.
he does say whoa. No, he said it was whoa.
Oh my God, whatever. All right, so I think that pretty well wraps this discussion. I don't know if you,
Well, I just want to say I'm going
yeah,
to
if you
present
wanted to
five
postulate
alternate
your
Crash
your
Bandicoot
your
theories.
alternate Crash universe theories, that I think that would be a
Yeah.
good place
So
to end
honestly,
on.
I feel like if you wanted us to give you a definitive answer of what Crash Bandicoot games are canon and what aren't, the answer is there really isn't.
Yeah,
Uh, and I think you kind of have to make your own judgment. And I think there's five theories that work. The first theory is, and it's the simplest theory, is Crash 1 through 3 is canon. Nothing else is canon. The series ended with Cortex turning into a baby, and everything else is non. Cortex and Entropy going back in time, and nothing else is canon in the series. And that's just an easy cut and dry because pretty much every other game post there has some sort of convolution in it that would kind of like call into question its canonical status. That's why I would make that argument. The main reason. The second argument is
yeah,
every Crash game that ever came out is canon, and this argument would basically say like stuff like Mind Over Mutant and Titans is explainable by like the Crash just like got tattoos and shit changed, or it happened at like a different time period, or you could still squeeze it in and fit it in somewhere. And the convolutions with like Entrance and Huge Adventure and Nitro Kart and all that stuff, they would just they would basically just piece the puzzle together and say maybe some of this stuff wasn't meant to be taken seriously, maybe some of these were just gags and not actual, like maybe these characters didn't actually appear here, it was just a gag, right?
right.
Just like how in The Simpsons, how Leonard Nimoy didn't actually teleport in that episode with the monorail, that was just a gag, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. So yeah,
Teleportation does not exist in the Simpsons franchise like in any other time, so it's just a gag. Like you could say that. So every single Crash game is canon, and then any convolutions were either like a gag or like an oversight or like just
sure.
explain them away or find the most common ground between games and then just ignore the little inconsistencies here and there,
Right,
right?
right.
With the exception of, I guess, the Skylanders Academy where Crash talks, that's just not canon at all because that's
Yeah,
not even a Crash.
yeah.
And then the third theory would be that the only games of Crash that are canon are the mainline Crash games, and that would be 1, 2, 3, Wrath of Cortex, and Twin Sanity. And then the ending of Twin Sanity, where Cortex is trapped in Crash's brain, is where they need to pick up in the next Crash game. And this would basically happen because all of these games flow into one another pretty easily and pretty like free form, right? Like
Yeah,
the stories of them kind of like pick up from where the previous one left off, and they make sense as a 5 game series, right?
yeah.
The next one, the fourth theory, would be Crash 1 through 3, Wrath of Cortex, Twin Sanity, and Mind Over Crash of the Titans, and then Mind Over Mutant are all canon, and that the
So
next
basically,
Crash game
just
would
all the
have to
single
pick up.
player Crash games in this one.
Right, exactly. Those are and the again the reason why the other games are not canon is because they're all either spin-offs or handheld, and
Yep.
they have all their story convolutions that don't make sense. And Crash of the Titans and Mind Over Mutant are canon because they were meant to be canon when they were released, and they are not like they don't change anything in the previous games. They're just because they change the design of a character doesn't mean that anything from the previous games ceases to exist. It's just kind of like the series just went in a new direction, right?
Sure.
And they can still be canon, and they can still exist in the same as like Crash 3 and Twin Sanity and so on, right?
Right.
And then I would say the final theory is probably the one that you and I are going to land on, where we have the most common ground, and that is that certain Crash games are canon and certain Crash games aren't canon based on what makes the most sense
Yeah.
between the game. And I think that would probably leave us with Crash 1 through 3, CTR. We'll take out Bash, that's not there. So it'll be Crash 1 through 3, CTR, uh, Wrath of Cortex, Twin Sanity, uh, and then the Titan and Mind Over Mutants games are kind of like an alternate universe. Um, and you would say that some of the games just outright did not happen, like Boom Bang.
Yeah.
Some of the games, like Tag Team Racing, their status, it does not matter if they happened. You could take it or leave it. And then other games like Entrance, Huge Adventure, and Nitro Kart, I just feel like including them in canonical status just muddies the water too much, so we're just going to throw them out. So basically, the with that it would be Crash 1 through 3, CTR, uh, Wrath of Cortex, Twin Sanity, Tag Team Racing, take it or leave it, and then Titans and Mind Over Mutant are both basically alternate universes or retelling.
Interesting.
And I say those are basically the five
The
main
five main schools of thought of what's canon in Crash and what's not. Yeah,
right.
and I
And
can
honestly,
see,
just take
I
it
can
take
see
it or
it.
leave it. Or
Yeah,
the other, I guess the sixth one would be like just pick and choose whatever games you like.
yeah,
Right?
but that doesn't really make any sense. Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I think the last one probably makes the most sense, just due to the fact that, like you said, there are certain things in Crash that just make sense and certain things that don't. And
But in all honesty, there really is no
there's no right
there's
answer.
no one. What's weird about Crash the series actually now looking at it all as a whole is there's really no one answer that makes sense 100%. Like even if you just take the first three games, the alternate ending of Crash 1 and the alternate ending of Crash 3 do not make sense in the canon of the series.
Yep, that
Like
is
even
true.
if those are the only three games to be in canon, like there's convolutions somewhere no matter what you unless you only say that Crash 2 and 3 are the only canon games. That's like the only way, and that doesn't make sense because it's what happened at the end of Crash 1, right? Or how did Crash get to where he is in Crash 2? Like no matter what you do, there's always at least one convolution or a couple convolutions that make it so it's
Well,
not a perfect
I guess we've just hit the
narrative.
conundrum of Crash. So basically, we spent the last 2+ hours talking about this to come to the conclusion that what's the
There
answer?
is no
We don't
conclusion.
know.
Yeah. Well, the conclusion basically is like if this was a math problem, the answer would be no solution because it just does not add up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of what it feels like, to be honest. I mean, having been a fan of Crash for almost 20 years now, it's like, on and off, granted, but um, it's like,
Honestly, I have a new theory. The theory that I'm just going to stick with is I'm just going to like it's not a new theory. It's one of the ones I said. I'm going to
okay,
stick with the theory of every single game is canon, and then you just kind of work out the convolutions by like
yeah.
ignore the stuff that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, there you go. That makes perfect sense. Ignore the stuff that doesn't line up with what you want to line. Yeah,
Honestly,
sure. What the hell?
it's probably the only way that you can really
Fit
you
everything
know
together. Yeah, because if you try
no,
any,
no,
if
no.
you,
It's the only way you can really even say that like there's a list of Crash games that are canon. Just say everything's canon, and then just don't worry about the stuff that doesn't make sense. Because if you're gonna like rule out games for having stuff that doesn't make sense, you can't do that because any series of games that you're gonna stick together and say that they are
there's
canon, unless
always going to be stuff
like
that doesn't
you
make
just
sense. Yeah.
exactly unless you're gonna say like just Titans and Mind Over Mutant are the only canon Crash games. like,
Yeah, I don't think anybody wants to say
like
that, but
right. So
um,
your theory is either going to sound like and look really stupid, or there's going to be a convolution in it. So
yeah.
my answer to this is everything is canon, and just ignore the things that don't make sense.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to end it there, but it's been a definitely a spirited and interesting discussion. So yeah, that is Crash Bandicoot in a nutshell, folks. What does the
Make
future hold? Who knows? But I am interested to find out. So
make sure you go and at every single Crash Bandicoot channel with this video, which that would include like Square Eyed Jack and I don't Canadian Guy A and
yeah, you
I don't
don't
know a
have to
couple
do
of those
that.
a
Um,
couple of those other channels that do Crash videos.
yeah, yeah, you don't have to do any of that. But that'll do it for us. So thanks for watching again, everybody. Hope you all enjoyed. Please hit that like button, leave a comment, and/or subscribe if you did enjoy, and stay tuned for more new videos in the future. I want to thank Jonny Reps for joining me once again to hash out the complicated issue that is Crash Bandicoot.
It's Crash is not that complicated, but it's more complicated than like it's way more complicated when you actually look at it than it is on the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, um, yeah. So
I should
that's
be a Crash
it.
Bandicoot historian.
Yeah, that would be a full-time job right there. So, but that is it,
Yeah,
and we'll see you next
and
time.
the question is where does the series go from here? Well, I guess we're just gonna have a wait until the next game comes out, and until then, we will
See you next time.
see you next time.